Hello listeners and welcome to the Tyrantcast. My name is Mitch and I am the Hive Tyrant. Today I present you with the 13th episode of a podcast style, primarily audio discussion topic centric video series. And for today's episode I'm joined as per usual by Warmaster Sam Mann. So Sam, how are you and what's new in your region of the Traxxas sector?
I'm good, Mitch. Thanks. Just been playing a lot of Conquest, man. You know, that's what we get for bitching about the delay with after the first cycles. Now these packs are coming out like, less than once a month. It's like every 3.5, 4 weeks
Right.
we're getting them. So playing Conquest, getting ready for a store championship I've got on Saturday. So we'll see how it goes. I have a feeling hopefully it'll come down to Kurt and I. That's every tournament we've had there so far has come down that way. So we'll see though. What else is new? I got Warhammer Quest, the adventure card game. So haven't really played it yet. Just got it yesterday, but I'm going to use that as my son's indoctrination into a little more advanced gaming. So We'll see how he does with that, and hopefully it's half as good as the board game from my childhood. But
well, I'll forgive your heresy introducing him to the fantasy aspect of the hobby, but hopefully someday he'll make it to 40K.
Right. Well, he's got like a basic understanding of like trolls and bats and wolves. Those are easy things to grasp. Tyranids and Dark Eldar, maybe not so much. But the Black Crusade wrapped up, so user Prezi won the whole thing with piloting Broderick War. So no big surprise there because War has been flexing his muscles all over the Traxxas sector lately.
No kidding.
And the spring season does start up pretty soon, about a week and a half or so. April 10th will be the date that opens. So if you're interested in some online Octagon League play, or if you want to return to League play after having been around this season, keep April 10th down on your calendar. And I did actually start a GoFundMe campaign for the Black Crusade League. I just had a lot of people ask me if they could donate. Like, I didn't have a PayPal account. I'm stuck in the 20th century with that kind of thing. So I did start this, though, and we got quite a bit of money already, and I had to choose like an arbitrary goal. You have to do that with GoFundMe, but we hit that goal. But of course, I'm still happy to accept donations. The further out I can fund this thing, the better. So in the past, all the postage and the prizes that I've printed out have come from out-of-pocket expense. So I really appreciate the community stepping up, and I think this next season everybody will get a participation prize, not just the continental U.S. players. So
awesome.
Yeah, so thanks for to all you guys who've already donated, and if you want to, just go to my website, blackcrusadeleague.blogspot.com, and there's a donation page you can check out.
Well, Sam, I just want to say a huge congratulations to you on running one hell of a league. It was something like 115 entrants, and even though, unfortunately, neither of us actually won the thing, it was still just a great opportunity for me to get in a lot of games, for a ton of users all around the world to just have a great time getting together and playing Conquest in an extremely competitive, albeit very friendly environment. So I had a great time myself. I'm sure a ton of other people did as well. You mentioned that signups for the spring league start as of April 10th, and I really cannot recommend enough that people look into it. If you at all play Conquest, if you even dabble in it, there's really no harm done in playing a single game a week, and who knows, there's a chance you may well win the championship. I took 5th place myself, and as I'm very happy to remind people, I've probably played maybe 30 or so games of Conquest myself, so I definitely think people can do much better than they presume they will. There's custom prize support, all kinds of great stuff. You mentioned that Prezi ended up winning the tournament against D-Lord, and that's a match up on my channel if you want to see Broderick War succeed against a really cleverly constructed old One-Eye deck. It's a hell of a game. I think I've got about 21 or so total matches filmed, filmed during the winter 2016 season, so check out the Hive Tyrant channel. I've got a playlist up there. Definitely sign up for spring. And then I guess just touching on personal stuff myself, I just recently started my spring 2016 academic term. I'm currently seeing how work, life, school balance is all going to work out with ever endeavoring to continue putting out daily videos. But, Sam, we're in for a fantastic episode today. Just to run through our agenda really quick, we'll do a much more in-depth discussion, kind of a summary, synopsis, analysis of the winter 2016 season of the Black Crusade, like what warlords were people playing, and just what were some of the trends that we've noticed, things along those lines. And then we'll also draw a little bit of a comparison to the recent Milan, Italy tournament, the Siege of Terra, an 82-person event. Not on Octagon, but actually in person. Fantasy Flight Games has unveiled a new article called Unforgiven, the name of our second Death World Cycle War Pack, and they actually unveiled our first Death World Warlord, a Space Marines faction warlord that is awfully exciting. FFG has released a new playmat, and this one's available at retail. It's called Unending War, and it's actually set up for 2 players, which is something we'd never seen before. And brand new, as of the day that Sam and I are sitting down to record this episode, Wrath of the Crusaders, our 5th war pack of the Planetfall cycle, is making its way to retailers everywhere, and FFG did us the courtesy of sending us the Chaos faction spoilers for that war pack. So hopefully I'll get this episode edited right quickly, and you'll be listening to this in short order. Most importantly, Sam and I recently had the opportunity to sit down with Daniel and Torsten of the Winvasion podcast. They were the one and only podcast for Warhammer Invasion, the canceled living card game that many consider to be the predecessor of a Conquest LCG, and that, Conquest is kind of the spiritual successor of that living card game. So they're 2 fantastic guys. It was a lot of fun doing that interview. It was something like a couple of months in the making because Sam's schedule didn't jive too well with German time, but it should be a great listen. And I suppose before we go any further, Sam, let's touch on our basics. Let's cover our fundamentals here. In our Tales from the Tabletop section, I guess, what are some memorable games you've been playing lately?
Yeah, I tried to take notes here the day of the game so that I had some more specifics and I could remember better to tell you guys, because you always have these great games, and then by the time I get here, I've forgotten all the details. But
right, and neither of us is getting any younger.
Right, that's right. So I had 2 good games. I had a lot of good games in the last couple weeks, but I'll tell you about a really good loss and then a really good win. I was playing Broderick War and going up against Codiaz, and planets 2, 4, and 6 were green. So he won planets 1 and 3, and he had his win condition on 5.
Okay.
And my win condition wasn't until planet 6. So I guess I kind of had planet 4-1. So on turn 4, when that was planet 1, I went to original planet 6 here and set up my army there. Set up a little bit of my army because I knew I had enough in my hand to replenish for his win condition.
Yeah.
Or I thought I did. Let's put it that way. And so here we go. It's turn 5. He plays an Inquisitorial Fortress. Everything else during deploy is pretty normal. He routes one of my 2 Chimeras because he had first action and the planet was not green.
Right.
Now, I played Summary Execution to turn the planet green.
Yeah.
Of course, it was an action too late.
Right.
It triggered off my bolt pistol. I damaged one of his units. But he benefited too because he, just like me, he also had 2 troop transports out. But I had to take the chance. I had to do it to have a prayer. And I also had forward barracks out as well. So I kind of thought maybe I can eke it out. So I played Preemptive Barrage. It was kind of a bloody first round, but after that first combat round, we both still had a lot out on the board. I mean, it was just like your typical AM swarm on both sides of the table. So second combat round begins, I get the forward barracks to trigger. And my mistake that probably cost me the game ultimately was I did not retreat war. I probably should have, because he's a big target, and he had the bolt pistol and everything. And at that point, I had no more shields in hand. He swings first for 3, plays out, flank him, swings again for 3, and bloodies war like that fast. And that was the difference, really. I mean, that I was able to hold on for like 2 more combat rounds just because of like forward barracks and stuff and troop transports. But of course, he had the troop transports, and that's kind of what lost me the game. So it was too bad, but it was a good game though, and it was kind of cool to see Astra Militarum on Astra Militarum action. But my big win was that was pretty cool. Was I was playing as Eldorath, and I was playing against Selene Morn, and on turn 1. I played a Bonesinger Choir and then a Wild Rider Viper at 2. He went to 1 uncontested, and I mobiled the Wild Rider Viper over. He plays Searing Brand to deal the damage, but I discarded the 2 cards to negate that effect. He had to retreat, and that planet was Planum, so I moved the Wild Rider back over to Karnath, which was where I'd committed Eldorath, which I think was Planet 2. I won that, so I triggered Taurus because I just had the 2 units out. And I think he had 2 army units plus Morn, so he had 3. The next turn, I played another Bonesinger, and then he put out a unit. I think I put out like a command unit. He puts out another unit. I put out a Mighty Mighty Wraith Knight for $2.
That is disgusting.
yeah, it was mean. I won that planet, and I triggered Taurus again. And then I triggered it again because I sent Eldorath there, knowing that, because I had the Wild Rider Viper and the Mighty Wraith Knight there and a gifted hand, and like all his shit was exhausted, so he wasn't going to 1.
Right.
And I beat him up there. So in 2 turns, I triggered Taurus 3 times. And I put 4 damage on Morn on that first. I think he did go to Planet 1 because I ended up putting 4 damage on Morn, and he had to get out of there. So turn 3, Elowith was Planet 1. I played a Wild Rider for $1 on Planet 2. I attached Drone Defense. I put a Warlock Destructor out on a blue planet with a jet bike on them. So I had 3 units at 1. I went to 2, and I set up. I did that to set up for the win later in case I couldn't beat him at 1. But he went to Iridial to try to heal Morn, and I had initiative there because neither of us had a Warlord. So I moved the Wild Rider over. I web shrined the unit. I jet biked the Warlock over. I played Mind War to exhaust another unit. I used the Drone Defense to AoE2 the 2 exhausted units. I swung on the readied unit with my Warlock to kill him, and then I gifted in the Wild Rider Viper after he killed it to basically just seal up the game. So it was like all these movement shenanigans. Just in like 3 turns, it was like he couldn't do anything. So
wow,
it was pretty cool.
Well, that is a hell of a story, Sam. It sounds like those Bonesinger choirs are definitely getting some work done, and it is just fantastic to hear of a new deck archetype like the Elite Heavy Eldorath deck just kicking all kinds of ass. And, just the sheer volume of new cards that you mentioned, like Mind War and the Jet Bike and the Wild Rider Viper and the Drone Defense Squad and, of course, the Bonesinger choirs. Like, it's just awesome to see so many new cards just totally really pulling their weight.
Yeah, I mean, that Wild Rider Viper is a great fucking card. Like, look at it this way. It's $1 more than Wild Rider Squadron. So, sure, you're paying more, but it's got an extra command, it's got 2 more attack, and it's got the same HP.
Right.
Now, granted, it can't move on its own in the middle of combat, but it does have mobile. And if you play it right, you can move them over, like if you have a Wild Rider there, or if you have a guy on a jet bike there, you can just move them over whenever. Like, I was just playing a game against Parker tonight, and I had a Wild Rider Viper on 2 and a Warlock, Wild Rider Viper on 2 and a Wild Rider Squadron on 2 that had Drone Defense on it. And then I had a Wild Rider Viper on 1. And I had a bunch of other army units on 1. Parker wasn't going to 1. And 1 was Aatrox Prime. So he went over to 3 so that I couldn't ping his whole army with Aatrox.
Yeah.
But at the beginning of the phase, I mobiled the Viper from 1 to 2. I won Planet 1 uncontested. We go down to Planet 3. and Parker blows up his Spore Sacs. I shield my Bealtan Guardian to make him have to kill it through an attack. He does kill it through the attack. I use the combat action to move the Wild Rider Squadron over, and then I triggered both Vipers off of that. And like in one action, all of a sudden there's 3 units, a 5/4, a 5/4, and a 3/4 with drone defense on it, like all just in his face.
Yeah.
And that card is just so good. I mean, and it's a really good value. I want to play more with that Fire Prism, but it just lost the deck slot to the Wild Rider Viper.
Yeah. If only it had ever so slightly better card art, but it's a fantastic card, so I think it's fantastic. Who knows? Maybe someday Star Cannon will end up making a debut, and then Armor Bane is going to make it all the more disgusting.
Yeah, I think, I haven't built, this crazy vehicle elite Eldrath deck yet. I think you can with, the Bone Singer and stuff, but, right now my feeling is, it's either Star Cannon or Drone Defense System. Yeah. There's just not room for both, but I think when Backlash comes out and it gives you a little more protection on some of these elites, you can run maybe a 23 or 24 count army unit deck list because you just have a lot of vehicles and a lot of elites, and you can get them out for cheap if you've got a Bone Singer Choir or two. And then maybe there, because you're lower on units because the units you have are so powerful and good, you could fit in both Star Cannon and Drone Defense System. And then if you're really crazy, maybe Ambush Platform too. That could be a real thing, I think, after Backlash gets here.
It definitely could be, and I guess I myself haven't really been playing any games. I've used the excuse of the Black Crusade being over to resume my hectic schedule of doing anything but actually playing Conquest. Talking about it is fine. Casting videos for hours on end is fine, but be damned if I actually sit down and play the game. But I guess lately I've just seen some incredible videos. I can't help but feel a little bit guilty. Last podcast, when we talked about some of our newest cards from What Lurks Below, I was excited about some of our new Archon, Selene, Morn specific cards, but I really didn't understand just how powerful they can be in theory, and I definitely think I'm falling rather quickly for our latest Dark Eldar Warlord, just because a couple of videos recently were sent in by friend of the channel, Christopher Dale Bates. He's fortunate enough to live right near the Fantasy Flight Games event center, and he sat down and played a few games with Taylor Parolini, and these are going to be videos available soon on my channel, so I won't spoil them here, but Taylor playing Archon Selene Morn has just been able to do all kinds of filthy things, and this is against one of probably the best Packmaster Kith players in the world. Like the Dying Sun's Marauder, they're a 2/3 without a command icon for 2, but each and every time you gain a resource, they ready. So maybe they commit to a planet with your Warlord. During the command phase, you win a planet that gives you a resource, they ready. If they've got a Bladed Lotus Rifle on them, they attack for 3 during ranged, so you can fire at a planet with them. If that's like a red planet, let's say you throw out a Shadowed Thorns Pillagers, that procs Archon Selene Morn's ability, they stand up, and this gets all the more ridiculous if you've got multiple copies, of course, but then maybe they fire again during ranged, then you play a copy of Raid, and we have to make a small correction. I guess in between our last podcast and this podcast, it was clarified by Brad Andrews that take a resource does result in the gain of a resource. So Raid will ready a Dying Sun Marauder, and it's pretty trivial to end up shooting 3 times during ranged with those, and then I've just seen the Kabalite Harriers do all kinds of dirty things where they're a 2-cost 1/2 with a command icon, and as a deploy action, whenever you play a Kabalite to their planet, you can pick any unit to take a point of damage, so long as that's an undamaged unit. But considering Incubus Warrior has 1 hit point, considering Chimera tokens have 1 hit point, considering you can play up to 3 copies of Kabalite Harriers at the same planet, and a single Shadowed Thorn's pillagers can proc 3 damage being distributed, they just get absolutely ridiculous. And if you're foolhardy enough to let your opponent stack a bunch of them all at the same planet, it just seems like an absolute nightmare. And allied with Chaos, where you've got Warp Storm and maybe even Sowing Chaos, it just looks like Archon Selene Morn is fantastic. And if ever there was an anti-Kith warlord, it's looking like it might just be Selene. But
yeah, just to pick off those chimeras with the Harriers, that's a real deal. I mean, I saw some talk on the Skype thread the other day that, people think by the end of this cycle, she's going to be tier 1, kind of hands down.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
I haven't played enough of her, to really see that, and I've actually had some good luck against her. But I guess I can't form a good opinion based on my own experience, but just from what I hear and what I see, it looks like she will be pretty strong.
Yeah, and I cannot recommend enough people check out those 2 videos that I'm referring to. And I also recently, I suppose, published a game featuring a proxied version of Chaplain Mavros, but a friend of mine, Thomas Wyatt Malore of the semi-local Omega Sector Gaming, he asked me one day, why is everyone so excited about Chaplain Mavros? Why is he so good? And I sat there and I really thought about it, and I wrote this giant essay about why Mavros is so great. And just the longer it went on, the more I just convinced myself that holy shit, this warlord is just ridiculous. Being able to potentially attack himself for 4 at a blue planet, doing that Blood Angels Veterans deploy stall, doing the triggering damage on your own units to activate Vow of Honor to attack for +3 and for up to an additional +2, and Mavros' ability triggering the Sword Brethren Dreadnought or Righteous Initiates. It just seems like the options there are absolutely absurd, and as we see more Space Marine and Black Templars cards, I cannot help but think Mavros is immediately going to be sitting at, right up there with Broderick War as one of the possible best warlords. But I guess, if anything, I just really want to kind of ask to all you viewers out there, what kind of experiences have you had so far with our new Planetfall cycle cards? Sam's Elite Heavy Eldorath deck has been fantastic. I've seen Archon Selene Morn just really kick all kinds of ass. And are you starting to have success with Barzul? What is your Planetfall cycle experience? I haven't had much of an opportunity to view or witness any Gorzod games, but I definitely hear good things, and I just cannot wait to see what comes in Pack 5 and Pack 6 in the Legions of Death, and then everything Conquest LCG beyond. But, Sam, I suppose as our first big, genuine topic for this episode, let's talk about the winter 2016 season of the Black Crusade. So you used to run the Octagon WA. It's been retitled the Black Crusade, but let's do a little bit of an overview of your first season.
Yeah, it was really good. I mean, we had specifically 111 people, so biggest turnout by more than double compared to what we've had in the past.
Right.
I know you got 5th place. I got not quite as good. I got 27th, but I'll take it. I was back in the top cut after a few seasons of not making it, so I was happy enough with that.
Sure.
I'll take 27 out of 111.
And I will settle for 5th.
Yeah, you'll settle for 5th. But yeah, it was really good, man. We had, like we say, the final was War versus Old One Eye, and War was he was strong. He was the most played warlord with he had 70 appearances, and he also had the highest win rate of 59%. 5 of the top 8 warlords in the top 8 games were War, and then in the top 4, 3 of the 4 warlords were War.
Wow.
So he might be new, but he's obviously here to stay.
Well, Sam, when you say
yeah.
70 appearances, how many games is that out of?
Out of 334 games.
Okay.
So quite a few.
Yeah, and I guess considering there were, I don't know, let's just round and say 26 or so warlords, that's definitely a statistically significant presence.
Yeah, absolutely. Kith took a little bit of a dip compared, she's been strong in the past seasons and in no small part to Corvus winning those past 2 seasons as Kith. But yeah, she took a little bit of a dip because I think War does pretty well against her. So she tied with Zarather for 4th place at a 55% win rate. And then she also came in tied for 4th place in popularity, both with Ragnar. They both showed up 51 times. So she only had one showing in that top 16. Of course, that was by previous champ Corvus.
Right.
And he lost there in the top 16. So, she didn't do as strong come top cut time. But that's okay because she's been riding high for a while. So, nothing wrong with her kind of taking a step back. Zarather, he made a big jump in popularity, and I think it's because he's probably the most favored warlord against War. And I should point out that although like user stats are not published during the season, like warlord and game stats are, and so there's a link for that over on my page. Dan, I always get his last name bumbled, but I think it's
Napolitano.
Napolitano, I think is how you say it. So if I bungle that, Dan, I'm sorry. But yeah, Dan Napolitano, he takes the data and he puts it on this nice, easy to read chart that's very informative. So that people were seeing that War was popular, I think, and I think they knew he was going to be popular even if they didn't see it. So Zarather did rise in popularity. He was the second most played warlord, 67 appearances, just right behind Roderick War, 70.
Wow. And
he did tie for Kith for 4th place in win rate at 55%, which, of course, that also led the Chaos faction warlords. Chaos was the most played faction. There was 123 appearances. So out of those 334 games, over a third were basically Chaos. Followed closely behind by the Space Marines at 110. So, aside from War, Vezuel was the most played of the new Planetfall warlords with 11 appearances, but he only went, 3-8, so little room for him to grow.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the interesting thing was that, 7 of the 8 factions all finished within 5 percentage points of each other for overall win rate. So, I would say that's a really well-balanced game right there,
Yeah.
Tyranids actually finished the highest at 55%. Eldar was at 53, Orcs at 52, Space Marine, Dark Eldar, and Astro Militarum all finished at 51, and Chaos was at 50%. So the lone disappointment here was definitely Tau. They are at 33%, so they're not even within, it's 17 percentage points between them and next to last place, and then every other faction is within 5 points. So
wow.
It was kind of sad to see Anshi and Shadow Sun both went 7 and 14 with 21 appearances each, and then Starblaze showed up one time, and he went 0 and 1. So not great for Starblaze, I guess. And then actually, kind of speaking of bringing up the rear, I know she's gotten new toys lately, and I think that's part of it, but Archon Slain Morn was 0 and 4. So interesting, of the two Boundless Hate warlords, she was much less popular, than Vezuel, and I think that's strange because she's better than Vezuel.
Yeah.
And I know these new cards weren't out during the season, but even out of the gate, I think she was a little better than Vezuel.
And I think that's
I'm not sure what to attribute that to.
Yeah, I think that's a really significant confound worth mentioning, though, is the way that this series works is that it's played over multiple weeks as opposed to sitting down over the course of a day or a couple of days and playing out an entire tournament. So as new packs are released, their cards are added to the card pool and they're tournament legal, so Archon Selene Morn only very recently got some really significant cards. Vezuel himself only recently came across some really significantly powerful cards that could definitely increase his likelihood of winning. So some of this data may be a little bit more unkind than our current card pool reality is.
Yeah, right. And then TC Hammer, he was not at all being played, and then in 1 week or within 2 weeks, there was 3 games. He went 0-3, and then no one brought him again. So then he was the least played warlord last season as well. So he doesn't seem to be too popular in competitive play. But in the surprise column, I would list the Tyranids and the Orcs.
Yeah.
Zoggy had a really strong showing. He had a 54% win rate with 26 appearances, and that could have even been better, except one of the players had to drop out of the league while he was sitting at 4-0. So he would have definitely made the top cut. Maybe he could have made some noise in there, but 3 different top cut players piloted him. Also, Nazdreg's win rate got a lot better once he got his new tricks in Boundless Hate, like Rock Bombardment and stuff. And then with Tyranids, they saw a big improvement over last season. Last season was the first Octagon League season that had him. Swarmlord, he finished with a respectable 50% win rate and 22 appearances. And then, of course, Old One-Eye did very well, obviously thanks to Part 2 D-Lord. But Old One-Eye had the second best win rate of any Warlord. It was 58% versus War's 59%.
Wow. And
it was so close that if D-Lord had have beaten Prezi in that final game, Old One-Eye, it would have been flipped, and Old One-Eye would have edged out War for the best record. He had 31 appearances in the league, and you can take D-Lord's games out of the equation because he went 6-2 with him. He was 4-2 in Swiss, and I think 2 or 3 of his games were actually with Swarmlord. And then once Top Cut came, he stuck to Old One-Eye. But even if you take those out, he still would have finished at 52% win rate, which is better than some of these more like established warlords. Like it would have been better than Nazdreg or Swarmlord or Urian or Ragnar or Kugath or Baharoth or any of the Tau warlords. So kind of a big jump up for the Nids. It was I was kind of surprised with that, and I was really happy for D-Lord that he went so far as he did, piloting Old One-Eye.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, all the way up to the finals.
Yeah, I mean, he was he the guy that knocked you out?
No, the gentleman that knocked me out was user Random Joe, a.k.a. Joe Huber, and if I go to my regionals, then he's actually local to this area, so maybe there'll be a little bit of a rematch, and I'll get to relive my humiliation all over again.
Yeah, I was always kind of laughing about Random Joe, because he kept doing really well, and, he made it to top 4. I guess D-Lord beat him in the top 4 now I think about it, so, but I was just like, all these guys are just shaking their heads like, I just got knocked out by some random Joe, Right. But Forward Barracks and Clavex tied for the number 1 spot of listed MVP cards, each with 8. Drop Pod Assault, Honored Librarian, Sowing Chaos, and Preemptive Barrage all came in next with 7 MVP votes, followed by Ammo Depot, Archon's Terror, Gleeful Plague Beast, and Warp Storm that got 6. Then after that, it kind of fell off just to this and that and everything else. But yeah, I kind of gave you guys a summary of a little recap I did on my website, but of course, you can go check that out. I always, on the submit your results form, I leave a spot for comments, and there's some really good ones in there that are always kind of funny. Like, my favorite is some guy said that his opponent attacked with the Rogue Trader, and then in the chat box, he typed flails uselessly. I thought that was kind of funny.
Nice.
But, yeah, you can check it out there, and then, of course, there's a link to the more exhaustive page that Dan does. So, yeah, really happy with the league, man. It was interesting. Like I say, War was all over it. A few surprises with some warlords and factions doing well. But other than Tao's kind of shitty showing, I thought it was very well balanced. All the factions were pretty right in there. And I guess I wasn't surprised that War did so well. But, like, God, there's a lot of War. Like you said, you had 21 recorded games. So that's 42 warlords that you recorded. So out of those 42, like, how many are War?
Well, let me go ahead and pull up the playlist really quick. I know that for a little while, let's see here, just taking a look at all the Black Crusade games, like the most recent match, moving backwards in time, it's Old One-Eye versus Broderick War. It's a Broderick War mirror match. It's a Broderick War mirror match. It's a Broderick War mirror match. It's Broderick versus Ragnar, Broderick versus Kith, Broderick versus Zarather, and then Ragnar versus Zarather, Captain Cato Sicarius versus Nozdreg, then Broderick versus Eldorath, Broderick War mirror match. Granted, a lot of that Broderick War was me playing as Broderick War, and go figure that the Hive Tyrant records his own games. But still, point being, there was a lot of Broderick War for good reason, but it did get a little bit old thinking, okay, is today's featured match for the week going to be one Broderick or two? So hopefully some of our new Planetfall warlords are going to, adopt their time in the spotlight.
Sure. And we should point out, too, that, like, the match that I dubbed the feature table, that I asked the guys to work with you and let you record if possible, it was usually among, the top players, like
Yes.
whoever had the better record. So a lot of the players that did very well played a lot of War. So,
Right.
that plays in part to it. But
Right. Prezi, the
yeah.
eventual champion, played War, and go figure, he was a very, high-performing player over the course of the league, so he was featured probably 3 times.
Yeah, and I should point out a little shout out to the non Western Hemisphere players. I guess the East region, mostly Europeans, but a couple others as well, and they did very well. Like 3 of the top 4 were from the East. So although they were less than us Western players in number, it was something like 60 something to 40 something. They represented very well. So good on them. And then just a big thanks to Dan Napolitano and Paul Steiner, and then you yourself, Mitch, because you guys all did a lot of work helping me with the league. Dan does all the stats. Paul does all his behind-the-scenes work with the data that he puts into his website and all the help he gave me with Excel. And then you, of course, recording all these games and getting them out there for people to see and enjoy. So thanks to you guys as well.
Yeah, I mean, while we're talking about Paul Steiner, I'll just say, if anybody ever plays games of Conquest, please report your results at 40kconquest.blogspot.com, and that's an invaluable resource for everyone in this community just to try and figure out relative power tiers and how well or how poorly decks and warlords are functioning. And then, of course, for the actual Black Crusade itself, it's going to be blackcrusadeleague.blogspot.com. So, I suppose before I start to talk about the Siege of Terra, anything else to throw out there about your tournament, Sam?
No, that's it. Just thanks for everybody for playing, and come sign up again. And Brad did send me a message just as a little thanks, saying he really appreciated the work I put into it just to kind of grow the game. And I mean, I don't do this for accolades from Brad; those aren't expected, but I thought it was nice of him to take the time to reach out to me and tell me thanks. I mean, it's important to him, that this game grows. Obviously, I'm sure it's important to FFG that the game does well, but obviously he's the lead designer and lead developer, and it's kind of his pet project or his baby. So, the fact that we're all out there playing it and trying to grow it, he appreciates that. So, if you want to get one game a weekend and have some fun, come on over. So.
I'm trying to picture in my mind how, lead developer Brad Andrews would say thank you for running an Octagon League via, pushing images of that little animated cat, because that's seems to be how he communicates lately.
Yeah, he does like to use the cat thing.
But we recently had a big tournament take place in Milan, Italy. It was the Siege of Terra. This was an in-person, live Conquest tournament. It had 82 entrants from all over Europe and the surrounding areas. A fair few friends of mine actually participated. We had Dan Jung, the Dutch national champion of 2015. We had Varun Ketterpal, the United Kingdom national champion of 2015 and the 2015 Conquest LCG World Champion, but a friend of mine, Pejman Kamai, actually ended up winning the tournament, and he happened to be playing as Broderick War. So I do not envy the sir that had to sit and play 11 consecutive games of Conquest in one day to win this tournament, but he did it, and a huge congratulations to him. So just to throw out some numbers in regard to what warlords we're seeing, and then maybe Sam, just let us know if anything strikes you as radically different than your own tournament. But Broderick War was 15 out of the 82 players, so Broderick was about 18%. Kith was also 18%. Ragnar and Cato were both about 13%. Zarather was 9%, and then from there it drops off considerably. actually. So Anshi had 4 total players, putting him at about 5%. Kugoth was the same. 3 people piloted Nosdrag, 2 were Old Zogwart, a couple Gorzod, a couple Old One-Eye, and then we had a token showing of just 1 player piloting Commander Shadowsun, Eldorath, Torquemada Kotiaz, Colonel Strachan, Archon Selene Morn, and a single Baharoth. And then of the actual top 16, it was a 4 War, 4 Kith, 4 Ragnar, a Kato, a Nosdrag, and then 2 other players, which were kind of forever lost in the annals of history. But, I mean, does that sound kind of the same as what you saw?
Yeah. The one thing that strikes me as strange is 1 Eldorath player. Like, that just shows that although we're getting this push for elites, we are still in a swarm weenie meta.
Right.
Because everyone knows that is Eldorath's weakness. And if there's a lot of war and a lot of Kith, and people are anticipating a lot of war and a lot of Kith, they're probably not going to bring Eldorath. But just to only have 1 really was like kind of wow. I thought that was strange. And then no Swarm Lord at all. Was a little surprising, and then like no Starblaze, no Barzul, that's like really not surprising. But
yeah,
the fact that there was just 1 Eldorath and no Swarmlord at all is a little strange to me. And I guess I should point out, just in case some of the listeners don't know, the reason I gave like appearances for my Black Crusade League as opposed to like how many players brought them is because my league takes place over multiple weeks. You can change up your deck. You don't have to stick with the same warlord or the same deck. You can change it up, but I don't know. That's just interesting. 1 Eldorath. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. But, I suppose, just on the topic of tournaments, our runner-up 2015 World Champion Seth Rosen reached out to me, luckily on a recording day, and he was kind of lamenting the fact that Chicago, Illinois was not fortunate enough to get a regional championship this year. So, unfortunately, that is not going to happen, but Seth Rosen is not going to take it lying down. Him and his local crew have decided to put together something they're calling the Midwest Sector Championship of 2016. And if you look up Midwest Sector Championship on Facebook, there's a group and an event of that same name. This is going to be taking place on Saturday, June 18th in Chicago, Illinois. I guess it's in the Downers Grove on the southwest side. I've never been to Chicago, so I have no idea what that means. But according to Dear Seth Rosen, this is going to be a formal level event, so everyone is expected to know the rules relatively well. Make sure you've got, opaque sleeves for your deck, and it's basically just hosted by the Chicago meta for the entire Midwest. The goal is to give players that don't have the opportunity to go to a regionals event or a Origin itself, I believe that's a gaming convention, it's basically a chance for them to compete at a very high-level competitive event, and of course Seth Rosen is going to be there himself. I'm sure he'll autograph cards if you'd ask him. It's going to be a $10 entry fee, but what's awesome about that is all participants are going to be receiving a custom playmat, and check out their Facebook event or group page to see the artwork for that, but then there's going to be a lot of prize support. They've got, of course, a prize yet to be announced for the top placing player, the champion of that tournament, but they're also offering custom commitment dials, like your command phase warlord destination dial, that are going to be awarded to the player that does the best of each faction, so kind of mirroring the tokens given out during the 2015 World Championship. They're also going to be doing raffles for official playmats, like the different seasonal championship playmats, the store championship playmats, as well as alternate art cards like the Vicious Bloodletters and Mordecai Rune Priests. So if around June 18 you're going to be anywhere near Chicago, Illinois, I definitely think it's worth making a bit of a trip. I think a friend of ours, Travis McDaniel, aka Octagon user I Fight Dragons, is going to be making something like a 3 or 4 hour drive just to attend this event. So meet Travis McDaniel, meet Seth Rosen. It's going to be great, and I definitely recommend checking it out. But I guess on to our next piece of news. Sam, FFG FFG recently, well, not really blew everybody's minds, but there's been hints and allusions, stirrings in the warp that eventually FFG was going to release some retail playmats. We got something called Unending War, which is actually a two-person playmat, and that definitely caught me off guard. But I guess just what do you think about FFG selling playmats at retail in the context of our seasonal tournament kits no longer including playmats?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of knew this was coming, like you say, because they're not putting playmats in the kits, and the other games have playmats for retail. But I really like this thing. It's about a foot bigger on each side than a normal playmat. It's 36 by 26 as opposed to 24 by 14. But it's $29.95. I think it's really cool. It's got, like, on each player's side, there's like a spot for your victory display, your HQ, your deck, and your discard pile. And it's got, like, on one side, the Winter 2014 mat, a.k.a. the box art, artwork on it.
Yes.
And then on the other side, it's got the 2015 Store Championship mat. So you got Kato blasting some Eldar on one side, and you've got Eldrath and some Chaos fighting on the other side. But I really like it. I'm going to buy one. I think it's cool. I know it might be a little small for, like, the tables we play on at RFLGS, just because it's like his playmat across from my playmat. It's like there's maybe 8 inches, 6 inches between the two playmats where we put the planets out at. So, it's not like two playmats plus a foot. It's just a foot more than a normal playmat. So it might be a little bit small for, like, the tables we have at our particular store, but those are a little wider than, like, your typical table. So I think it's pretty cool, man. And I'd be surprised if it was the only one they did. I think it'd be cool if they came out with non two-sided mats. I'd like to see in the future, even different artwork for the two-sided mats. What do you think?
Well, I suppose really the only other thing to mention aesthetically about the mat is that it has a spot for each of 7 different planets on the face, I guess, of it. They're little black rectangles where you can just lay out your in-play face-up planets and your out-of-play face-down planets. So it looks pretty good. It's interesting that, like, the playmat art is kind of superimposed upon those black rectangles. Like, Captain Cato Sicarius is standing there holding his plasma pistol, and it's actually like the art is, like I said, superimposed over the black, so that's kind of interesting. For this specific mat, they chose one of my probably favorite playmats, that Winter 2014 one, but I think it looks a little bit less good when you have the extended version. So when you see the Dark Eldar and their Ravagers, their little Raider skiffs, the art starts to get worse. And then on the flip side, where it's the 2015 Store Championship mat, that's actually my least favorite playmat, but I think when you see all of the art, it's actually a little bit easier to stomach because it's not these, like, bright red Khorne Berserker and green Eldar Farseer, like, space Christmas colors. So I don't know how I feel about this mat, but two-person is cool. I was just really surprised we didn't see anything along the lines of, like, faction-specific mats. I know a Game of Thrones does mats for each of the different houses, so that kind of took me by surprise. But if you could pick, Sam, like, what would you want to see as playmats or these two-person mats?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be cool to have, like you say, faction-specific one-player mats. And then, I'd like to just see variants of this with different artwork. And the one other thing I should mention about these black rectangles where you put the planets, I saw on Facebook some people were like, well, that's stupid. Why would you put all 7 cards? Like, why would you put the 2 out-of-play cards, like, in the play area? And, like, because now you're tightening up the space. But you don't have to put, like, a planet on each, you can just, like, skip them. You know what I mean? Like, and put the 5 in-play planets and have, like, space them out a little more. So you can do that, I think, too.
Some people like to color within the lines, Sam. That's all I'm saying.
Not me, baby. Not me.
Yeah. Well, I guess, I personally, as someone who never really plays Conquest, I probably won't pick one of these up myself. It's only $29.95, which seems pretty reasonable for a pretty gigantic mat. And considering what I've paid on eBay for some playmats a time or two, I think $29.95 is perfectly reasonable. So I guess if I were to pick any two-player mat, I guess my personal favorite playmat happens to be the one of the Sakea XV88 broadside, the big Tau crisis suit thing that's shooting off all sorts of rockets. I love just how rich and blue and dark that art is. I don't really know what would complement it well on a two-player mat. I wouldn't be very shocked to see another mat that maybe had the Legions of Death and the Great Devourer art on either side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'd be cool.
But I guess I just don't know. But really, any kind of, I don't know what you'd call this, like accessory content or like ancillary content for Conquest, I'm cool with it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I'm down with it. Let's move on here to the news article that came out, the Unforgiven, which will be the second pack in the Death World cycle. What do you think right off the bat of this cool little cover art here, pack art, compared to, say, the Jungles of Nectivus?
Well, I guess a friend of the channel, Parker Ince, had a problem with this card art. It depicts a Salamander's Chapter Space Marine with a flamer incinerating something, and he was frustrated that Unforgiven, that's kind of a, isn't it a Dark Angels thing? Like,
that's correct, yeah.
Yeah, they don't like the Fallen, so he was like, well, why is it a Salamanders? It should be a Dark Angels. And of course, I had to bring up, maybe it's the Salamanders, doling out punishment or repercussions upon these unforgiven individuals. So I think it's fine. I think it's cool. I would love to see more Salamanders trait cards, just because who doesn't like a green armored space marine? And I guess considering it's the Dark Angels, we're kind of doubling up on a lot of green armor. But Jungles of Nectivus had that Lictor. It was sweet. That was original card art. This seems like original card art. I guess kind of the only weird thing about this is this art, if we see this Salamanders with a flamer on a card, it's probably going to be in a pack other than this one.
Correct.
Unless we see signature cards and Space Marine cards, so that's kind of weird, but original art is awesome, and really the big exciting thing about this article is that we get a ton of, well, not a ton, but we get we get a ton of spoilers for the Death World cycle. So Sam, why don't you introduce us to Epistolary Vezuel?
Yes, Epistolary Vezuel. He is the new Dark Angel Warlord. He is a Psyker and a Dark Angel. He's a 2/6. And 7 cards, 7 resources to start the game. He's got the reaction. After you deep strike a card, draw 1 card. It's a hard name to pronounce. It's a mushy mouthful, but I will say Dark Angels are my favorite chapter of Space Marines. And it was funny, like after they spoiled Jungles of Nectivus, we were talking with like Parker and Travis and John Gobey on Facebook, and we were all talking about how, okay, they're going to have a Dark Angel Warlord as the Space Marine Warlord in this cycle, because they've shown that, what was the Chaos card? Invocator?
Cetherial?
What was the guy? Cetherial the Invocator, yeah. He had the Fallen trait. So, that was kind of the thing we were thinking about and talking about. I remember that conversation finally, because I love Dark Angels. So I'm really happy to see the Dark Angels as a new playable, faction or whatever within Space, or not faction, but
yeah,
what I'm saying, a new playable chapter within Space Marines. So it's very cool. I should point out here on Visual, he is in blue, and obviously the Dark Angels are like a green colored thing, but typically the Librarians are in blue, so I was okay with that. But it was kind of just like more blue on the Space Marines. Are we ever going to have a non-blue Space Marine Warlord? I guess when we get a Blood Angel Warlord, maybe we will, but yeah. I like this guy, though. I mean, 2/6 is fine. and his reaction can be very strong. I think it depends on how many Deep Strike cards we have. We know there's going to be the Space Wolf kind of jump pack backpack thing that we saw spoiled in the Nectivus article. And then speaking of Deep Strike cards, Mitch, what about his unit?
Sure. So I guess probably my personal favorite card here in this signature squad, because it is ridiculous, is going to be 4 copies of Vezuel's Hunters. So it's a 3-cost unit, and of course the cost is in red to indicate that it's a Deep Strike keyword unit, and it's 1 command icon, 2 attack, 2 hit points, soldier trait, Dark Angels trait. It's Deep Strike 1, so as a reminder for Deep Strike, you can deploy this card face down for 1 resource. When a battle begins, you can pay this card's Deep Strike value to turn it face up. The Deep Strike value is 1, and its reaction is after you Deep Strike this unit, deal 2 damage to a target enemy army unit at this planet. So you've got 2 options for this unit. For the cost of 3, you get a 2/2 with a command icon that sits at a planet and can help you to win command. It contributes to your economy. Or you can pay 1 resource to put it in reserve. That's what a face-down Deep Strike card is called. And then when a battle begins, you can pay another resource for a total of 2 to flip it up, and then you trigger that reaction and deal 2 points of damage to an enemy army unit at the same planet. So a 2/2 with a command icon for 2 is totally fine, and an ability like that can kill an enemy unit that might have range, that might have area effect, regardless as to whether or not you have initiative, that strikes me as great. So I think these guys are awesome, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I really like him too. I mean, I wouldn't love to pay $3 for this card because $3 for a 1 command 2/2 is subpar. Now you can make the argument that the reaction makes up for that additional cost, and that's probably a fair argument. But I'd just much rather get him in for 2 if possible, via Deep Strike. And let's say you put 2 of these guys on a planet. When you Deep Strike them both, that's 4 damage. It doesn't. I mean, I guess it's 2 instances of 2 damage.
Yeah.
But and then if they're there with actually they don't have to be there, but if Vezuel himself is hail anywhere on the board, you draw a card each time you Deep Strike. So turn 2 of these up, draw 2 cards. I mean, that seems very strong, and their reaction is pretty cool too. I mean, just comboing like Crushing Blow. I mean, it's like Ragnar, but like multiple Ragnars. You know what I mean? Perhaps if you have more than one in play. So yeah, just really cool card, man.
Yeah, I mean, it just looks great, and Brad Andrews was kind enough to kind of clarify for me a little bit about how Deep Strike works, and will explain kind of as it's relevant. But let's say if you were to put this card into reserve, so that's again what it's called when you deploy a Deep Strike card face down, you put it into reserve. If that happens at any planet, it just stays in reserve. So, planet number 3, a round passes, that becomes planet number 2. A card in reserve at that planet just stays in reserve, but whenever a planet leaves play, if there's a card in reserve at that planet, it is discarded. So if for some reason you don't have a resource and you were anticipating it, if you cannot turn that card face up by paying its Deep Strike value, it's going to be discarded when a planet leaves play. And I guess that's just very different than how units function, because they normally bounce back to their controller's HQ. And then I guess in A Game of Thrones, the living card game, the first edition, there was a shadows mechanic that every Conquest LCG podcast has referenced. I guess in that game you could only turn 1 card in shadows face up each battle, but there's no such restriction for Conquest. So if you've got 4 copies of Vezuel's Hunters, if you've got 4 resources, turn them all face up and destroy up to 4 enemy army units potentially.
Yeah, very cool. It's a little bummer that it can't hit tokens or synapses, but whatever, it's fine.
Right. But another fantastic card, potentially, depending on how many more Deep Strike cards we see, introduce us to our signature attachment.
Yeah, it is the unique attachment, Fulgaris. It is 1 cost, 3 shield, weapon and war gear attached to your warlord. Reaction: After you deep strike a card, attached warlord gets +1 attack and +1 HP until the end of the phase. So it's not one or more card. It's just every time you deep strike.
Right.
So you put this thing on Vezuel, and if you deep strike 2 cards, he's a 4/8. If you deep strike 3 cards, he's a 5/9. Like, he can get ridiculously powerful.
Yeah.
And one little funny thing I want to bring up, I saw on, I think it was Facebook, or I don't know where it was, Card Game to be somewhere. Somebody brought up, well, I don't like that he's switching sword hands between his warlord art and his attachment art. But I thought of something, and before I could type it, the comment popped up, and that is Space Marines are all ambidextrous. So it's just another little cool Space Marine fluff tidbit that these guys are such badass warriors that they're just as good with their offhand as they are or they have no offhand, I guess you would say. So
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of a funny little thing, but really powerful card, man. I mean, the fact that you could, even +1/+1. Now, granted, it's only to the end of the phase, so if you've got him at a 4/8 and he's got 6 damage on him, well, he's bloodied after that phase is over. But, for that final battle, that could be a big thing.
Yeah, this is entirely dependent on how many non-signature deep strike cards we have, but go figure, you're probably going to be wanting to use a lot of those if you're running Epistolary Vezuel. I find it interesting that if that is meant to be the Dark Angels Warlord, looks like he's changed outfits between both of these cards. He's in the standard Dark Angels green, radically different than his blue, I guess, librarian armor.
Yeah.
But I just think it's an awesome card. Within his signature squad, we've got 4 copies of his army unit that are deep strike. We've got 2 copies of his event. And if the stars align and you can flip all of those, you're, running around with like an 8/12 warlord. That is just insane. And if that just so happens to be the final battle, like you were saying, who cares if he's bloodied because you're about to win the game? And, just considering how many different effects warlords are immune to, like Archon's Terror cannot target a warlord, and Klavex War Leader, all of that stuff, Fulgaris could just be a garbage card from time to time, but more often than not, I don't know if I'm comfortable saying that, but potentially it looks like it's got some really serious power behind it, and when we're done with all of these signature cards, I'd just like to do a little bit of a comparison to Ragnar Blackmane, because I think that, I don't know, but Vezuel looks like he's going to get pretty serious pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. What about the signature support, Mitch?
Well, it's going to be a 0-cost support. It's the Dark Angels Cruiser. So its upgrade trait, Dark Angels trait, and deploy action is exhaust this support to put a target unit you control at a planet in reserve. And again, that basically flips it from face up to face down. So Vezuel's Hunters that were sitting at planet number 2, you see the HQ phase happen, then planet number 2 becomes planet number 1. Maybe you've already benefited from the Hunters having been deep struck. As a deploy action, you can exhaust that support, turn them back face down, and then for an additional resource, you can get that ability all over again. And I was actually talking to Taylor Parolini, whom I mentioned before, and he said it in a very tongue-in-cheek kind of funny way, but like, let's say you've already got some units or events that are in reserve at a planet. If they're all face down, if they all look identical, is there any rule that says you can't like pick up all those cards and kind of mix them around, or do like the shell game where you put like a coin underneath a bunch of cups and you change the order of them? Yeah, because we might see a card that's like, reveal the identity of a deep strike card, and then, do you have to like set that aside and you can't rearrange the order of it? I just really hope that FFG is very, very explicit in regard to what you can and cannot do with these cards in reserve. But just another important thing about this support is that when a card is put into reserve, it maintains its current state. So if you've got a copy of Vezuel's Hunters that have a damage token on them, when they're turned face down, they keep that point of damage, and they also stay ready or exhausted. They're, like Brad Andrews described it as, they just don't care if they have damage or whatever their state is, but they do retain it. So if for some reason they were exhausted, if when you flip them face up, they stay exhausted. So I
Right.
guess it looks like it could be a pretty significant card.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be pretty situational. I think how many times are you going to have like this card that deep strike, and then you want to turn it back over to deep strike again? I mean, I totally see the synergy. I'm just not sure exactly how often that will happen. But,
Yeah.
there's only one in the deck, and it costs, 0. So this is, I think, more of like a mid to late game card. Like maybe, you set yourself up with a hunter at 2. Why not pay $1 and try to maybe kill their unit that's there where there's no battle happening, and then for free you can turn them back over for the next turn. So
Yes.
I definitely like it. And then you alluded to earlier how we have 2 copies of his event, which are deep strike cards. So this is the Unseen Strike. It has no cost, so you like no regular cost, so you cannot play it outside of deep strike. But it's essentially a deep strike cost of 2 because you got to pay 1 to put it down and pay 1 to deep strike it. And it has the reaction, after you deep strike this event, you gain initiative this battle. So I don't know. Like, I mean, is $2 worth gaining initiative when you wouldn't have it? Potentially, it could be. I guess it's $2, but you also, assuming Vezuel himself is Hail, you gain a card. So,
Yeah.
Conventional wisdom says that a card is kind of sort of worth $2, so it's kind of sort of a free play, maybe. But I don't know. I mean, this is just such a new mechanic, and there's like nothing to compare it to that I'm really gonna have to like play it and test it to see what I really think of this event.
Yeah. I mean, I cannot agree anymore. It's, of course, sometimes you're going to want initiative, but I think often enough you're going to be able to win initiative just by having your Warlord present, or the initiative token will just simply fall in your favor. It's another Deep Strike card, of course, which has natural synergy with Fulgaris, and I can only imagine that we're going to see more and more synergy over time. You could use it to kind of trick your opponent into, the more Deep Strike cards come out, it's a face-down card. Your opponent will have no idea if it's an army unit, if it's an event, or I guess if it's an attachment, like we've, I guess, kind of had teased.
Yeah, we know there's that one attachment coming, right?
Yeah. And there's nothing saying you have to deep strike this card if you do put it into reserve. So if your opponent's Warlord doesn't show up at that planet, then, if you're not in desperate need of cards, or if your epistolary is already bloodied, then maybe you don't bother deep striking it, or maybe you even just want to use it as like just a threat out there sitting on the tabletop, like you are threatening that you might be able to win planet number 1. So I don't know. It's going to be an interesting card, and just while I'm thinking about it, so far as we can read off of the cards, like it says, when a battle begins, you can pay a card's deep strike value to turn it face up. It doesn't specify a battle at that planet. So you might be able to use Dark Angel's Cruiser and Vezuel's Hunters to just harass your opponent's economy units. So
That's correct, yeah.
I don't know. It's just a lot of cool possibilities, but I guess, like, overall, what do you think about this Warlord that's just radically different than anything else we've seen for Space Marines?
Yeah, I mean, I think the jury will kind of be out until we really play with him, just because he is so different, and it's going to take testing to see how all this synergizes together. But the one other thing I wanted to mention about Unseen Strike is, like, I would assume you can play 2 of these back to back. Like, granted, the second one won't do you anything, but let's say you've got more money than cards and you need cards, or let's say you've got Fulgaris attached to Vezuel, then if you can afford it, with resources to spare, it might be worth the $2 to draw an additional card and give your Warlord +1 attack and +1 HP. So that's kind of an interesting, I wonder, like, can you play it when you don't have initiative, or when you've already... I'm sorry, can you play it when you do have initiative, or when you've already gained initiative through a first copy of it?
Yeah, so the RRG states that a card ability can only be initiated if its effect has some potential to change the game state. So,
yeah, which it would if, like, because you're drawing cards
but
or you're...
I guess what kind of gives me pause there is the reaction itself. Like if you already gain the initiative, that single ability isn't going to alter the game state. Like Vezuel's ability will, but then the first ability will have to be resolved.
Right. Well, we'll see, I guess. We'll have to wait for clarification. But
Yeah.
yeah, as a whole, it's very cool. And like I said, I will play it, even if, I'm going to play it, obviously, to test it. But even if I, for some reason, didn't want to, I love Dark Angels, so I will definitely be playing this guy. What about you? What do you kind of think is your overall thoughts?
I just think he has the potential to be great. Of course, a lot of it is going to depend on what else comes out, but Vezuel's Hunters just look fantastic as a unit. Like I was mentioning, the comparison to Ragnar, Blackmane Sentinel is a 2/2 for 2 with a command icon that you can relocate. Vezuel's Hunters, you can potentially kill off an enemy unit, and then they can attack. They're not quite as flexible, but I just really like that just premise behind them. And then Fulgaris versus Frostfang. Fulgaris has got no ceiling to how powerful it can make your warlord, and Frostfang, I believe it costs an additional 1 resource, and it's only +2/+2 so long as an enemy warlord is at that same planet. So I think Fulgaris is far more flexible, and I just don't really know if we're going to be seeing a lot of players be using Ragnar once the Epistolary is an option, but I guess that's just my take on it.
I guess we will see.
Yeah, do you have any thoughts how he might measure up to Kato or Mavros?
Well, I don't know. My gut tells me Mavros is going to be really, really strong. And just signature squad here. We just don't know enough.
Yeah.
Mavros' signature squad on its own, it's very good, but it's not like blow you away good. It's all the other Black Templar cards and all their unstoppable abilities and all these, attachments like the Black Sword and the Dishonored Librarian and all these things that all work together to make that squad very good.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll just have to see. You've got 6 deep strikeable cards here. We know you can have up to 3 copies of this Space Wolf, Valkyrie backpack thing. So that's 9. There's going to be like this balance of how many are there going to be, how many do you want, in a deck, because for every unit you have in reserve, that's a unit that's not contributing to command. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I'm looking forward to it, though.
Yeah. I'm curious as to how strong his economy is going to be, because, just like Yuri and Rakarth, I guess, doesn't have any command icons on his, signature units. The Vezuel's Hunters, unless you're really making some poor life choices, you're probably going to be wanting to put them face down more often than not. And so who knows what else we'll see, but I think, given his predilection for drawing a ton of cards and just how powerful these Space Marine events like Crushing Blow, Indomitable, Drop Pod Assault are, he strikes me as he might be a little bit of a glass cannon, especially if you've got a lot of outgoing damage thanks to those signature units. So I guess so much remains to be seen, but I'm optimistic about him, and if he's anything, well, I guess he's an example of what the Death World cycle has in store warlord-wise, so I'm excited to see what else comes. But, Sam, as per usual, Fantasy Flight Games did us a solid. They included a card fan of non-Space Marine cards, and why don't you introduce us to some of those?
Okay, I will, but real quick, let me go back to the signature squad. I made a boo-boo earlier.
Sure.
I said that if you paid 3 for his Hunters for a 1-command 2/2, that maybe the reaction would make up for it, but that was stupid because the reaction only happens after you deep strike. So
Yes.
Unless you're like in dire need of command, you're an idiot if you play this thing face up. And then also with Fulgaris, it is not a relic, so you can play Iron Halo on Vezuel if you wanted. But just those 2 things to clarify my earlier missteps. But yeah, the fan, we've got 3 cards we can't really see and 2 cards we can. So just to kind of go over the ones we don't know much about, there's a 2-cost Eldar army unit, the Ardent Outcast. He's a 0-command 1/3, and it's each something, 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 gain something, something, something. So we don't know much about him. but I'll be interested to see what he does, because Eldar without command are always interesting units.
Right. The adherent outcast, yes.
Oh, what did I say? Ardent? Oh, sorry.
It's all
Adherent.
good.
Well, he is ardently adhering to being an outcast. So,
Yes. And judging by the card art, where it's like a, I don't know, 3 meter long sniper rifle he's holding, maybe it has something to do with ranged. I don't know.
yeah, maybe so. He's rocking that top knot, though, pretty well.
Right.
Next up, we have a card that I think many of us assume is going to be a torture card for Urian, hopefully, but it is a 1-cost, 2-shield, loyal Dark Eldar event called 1,000 Cuts. And that's all we know about it, other than there is a homoculi in the artwork. There is what appears to be a twisted rack in the artwork. So I have no clue what this thing does, but the thought of a 0-cost, 2-shield event in Urian, hopefully that'll be something to make him a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, it's... who knows what it's going to do, but that card art is very suggestive of Urian Rakarth. It looks like there's all sorts of debauchery and torture about to occur, so I look forward to whatever that card is.
Yes. And then we have the 4-cost army unit for Astra Militarum that is loyal, the Firstborn Battalion. It's got a bunch of what look like bearded Russian soldiers here, but we don't know much about them, although my 40k knowledge is lacking. But based on the last few letters we can see of this trait, I know that's like a legion or a battalion or a world, like something Rova, like, I don't know, but it looks like it's going to be a trait that is like another one of these,
Vostroya?
Vostroya, that's what it is, yeah. So I would assume it is Vostroya based on the artwork and the fact that we can see Roya on it. So thanks for clarifying that.
I would say that's a very strong possibility.
Yes, very strong. So maybe we'll see a Vostroya Warlord in the Death World cycle. But
that would be kind of cool.
Yeah, I don't know what it's going to... You can't see it. It just says something, more support cards, and then the second line, all you can see is the last word with ranged. Yeah. So and, something keying off supports, if you have... whatever, blank or more support cards, something, whatever, ranged. So, I don't know, but, we'll have to see. 4 costs can be expensive. It's always in that no man's land of, that's the worst kind of card to get, like Deception. Right. But,
Right. It doesn't quite have the elite protection.
Right, exactly. What about the 2 cards we can see, Mitch? Why don't you read us our first little cute fella here?
Sure. Well, as I'm the renowned chaos player between the two of us, why don't I just say the infectious Nurgling is an adorable little guy with kind of his tongue extended there, and he's kind of like falling apart into a pile of just, organs and dripping goo and, boils and pustules and flies and maggots and just a charmer, this guy. But anyways, it's the 1-cost infectious Nurgling. It's no command icons. It's a 2/1. It's a demon and Nurgle trait unit, and it has Armor Bane. So... with Zerathur, it can attack for 3 Armor Bane. If you've got initiative, that could be awfully strong. But you're the Chaos player. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's just another example of a non-Tzeentch card that's better than Zerathur, probably. But yeah, I mean, no command is kind of sad. But a 1-cost, like you say, it's probably like a slightly cheaper, but no command, but slightly better Alpha Legion Infiltrator. Like, Alpha Legion Infiltrator is a great card if you have initiative. This thing could maybe be better, though, because, like, they can, like, I don't know, maybe it's a net, because, like, they can maybe shield 2 of the 5 coming from the Alpha Legion Infiltrator, as opposed to here it's 3 that they can't shield. So, I don't know, and he's probably not as good in Zerathur with, like, Infernal Gateway as the Alpha Legion. So, I don't know if this is going to be like an auto-include for any Chaos deck, but he just, again, strikes me as better with Zerathur than he does Kugath.
Well, and speaking of performing very well with Zerathur indeed, since this is a Nurgle trait unit, I think a natural card that we never really see, but all of a sudden it might become a bit of a thing. It's going to be Blight Grenades. You just slap that for the cost of 1 onto a Nurgle army unit like this one, and then as a combat action, you sacrifice that attachment, you give that Nurgling area effect 2 until the end of the combat round, but just like we learned with On-Shi and Gun Drones, because it's got Armor Bane, because it's got area effect 2, for 2 resources and a couple cards, you can do an area effect 2 volley at your opponent with Armor Bane, and if it's Zarather, then you're going to add another Armor Bane point of damage onto each and every enemy unit at that planet. So this
that's a nasty little combo, Mitch.
Yeah. This Infectious Nurgling may not seem like much, but it packs a little bit of power for sure, and if it makes an old kind of crummy card more viable, then I love it.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, good combo. I'll have to try it. And then next up, lastly, we have the 1-cost Tyrannid support, the Lomi Brood Hive. It is non-unique, and it is a location, and it has the action or reaction, I guess action, reaction, something. After you deploy an elite unit, exhaust this support to put 2 Termagant tokens into play at the same planet as that unit. So, very cool. It is not unique. It is not limited. You get 1 or 2 of these out, and you could have a little mini swarm. I think this card can really make Clogged with Corpses a thing outside of Swarmlord, and I really like it for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems so powerful. The fact that it's not unique and that it's not limited, like you said, for the cost of 3, the first time you play an elite each round, you could potentially get 6 Termagant tokens at a planet, and investing kind of, it's a conditional effect, but 1 resource for 2 Termagant tokens seems like an alright deal, and if you can do that round after round, that really can make a hell of an effect pretty quickly. This is a location, so it can be destroyed by the Imperial Fist's Devastators, but it just strikes me as a pretty ridiculous card with any Tyrannid Warlord, like Subject Omega. If you ambush a Yumgarl Genestealer at a planet, maybe that's attacking for 6 against the enemy Warlord, and then further, you've got 2 Termagant tokens at that same planet that themselves are going to be able to attack for 1. Or with the Swarmlord, if you're running a lot of Hive Mind specialization units, maybe they pick up, ranged, maybe they're attacking for more than 1 point of damage. You could play a Biovore Spore Launcher, that 6-cost elite Hive Mind spec unit, and then all of a sudden you've got 2 area effect 1 Termagant tokens sitting at that planet. So it just strikes me as a hell of a card, and really all of this Death World stuff is just introducing all kinds of fascinating new possibilities. So I'm a big fan of this card, and the more cool elite stuff we get, the better.
Yeah, I mean, putting that meatball launcher into play, and then getting an additional 2 copies of AoE 1 is pretty badass. And I love the name Lomi Brood Hive. I mean, I don't know if in parts of the world or country where our listeners are, but you're here in the Midwest, there's no mountains, there's no great hiking. So if you want to go outdoors in Missouri, you rent a canoe and float down a river and get drunk. And there's always this just pollution at the edge of the water, in a little nook or cranny of the river that's just this off-white, yellow, bubbly foam that is just built up, and Lomi Brood Hive totally makes me think of that. So
Yeah, I guess in these parts you rent a raft and then you get drunk and then you drown in the Yakima River is kind of what tends to happen around here. But just because I had no idea what loam is, it's apparently a fertile soil of clay and sand, or it's like a soil with roughly equal proportions of sand, silt, and clay. So the more you know, but this just seems like a hell of a thing. I could even even see this being used to, like, you play an elite, you get a bunch of Termagant tokens, and then maybe it sets you up for the kind of maligned Burrowing Trigon, where it costs 10, but you decrease the cost every time you have a Termagant token. And if we see a lot of, cost reduction through, like, Digestion Pool, if there's some sort of, like, Tyranid version of the Bone Singer Choir or something along those lines, this could be pretty fantastic. So I think all of these cards are looking pretty stellar, and I'm just super pumped for what is to come.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that, like, if you played an elite, like, if you had a Digestion Pool out and you paid a 5-cost elite, now you get a 5-cost elite for 3 at an infested planet. You get to put 2 tokens out. Maybe you already have some tokens there. Now you play the Burrowing Trigon for a discount, and then you get 2 more tokens. Like, that could be a real thing, too. And this has nothing to do with anything, but speaking of floating down a river, I just thought of this funny story that has nothing to do with Conquest, but one time we were floating down a river, and we pulled over at this campsite, and we were just sitting there hanging out, and this next group of canoes comes rolling by, and it was just like you could not envision or script up like a more white trash like crew of canoes. Like, the dudes were just all like drinking and smoking, and there was like a pregnant chick who was like 8 months pregnant with like a beer in her hand and a cigarette hanging out of her mouth, and they're like, "Where are y'all from?" And we're like, "Kansas City." And they're like, "Oh, we know that, we're from Raytown." And, like, spoiler alert, we're all from Raytown. Like, that's the suburb I grew up in. And like, all of us just looked at each other, and it was like, don't say a fucking word. Like, nobody say anything. And we're like, "Oh yeah, Raytown, we've been by there. Sure, we know that place." And, like, yeah, we're not admitting that we're from the same hometown as you guys. So that's my Lomi Broodhive unrelated story.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so back to Conquest here. We've got some spoilers, Mitch. Why don't you take it away here?
Yeah, well, without further ado, I'll just thank Fantasy Flight Games for providing Sam and I with the opportunity to spoil the Chaos faction cards from Wrath of the Crusaders, but our first card is going to be an army unit. It is the Berserker Warriors. For the cost of 2, they have no command icons, they have a loyal icon, 3 attack, 2 hit points, the Warrior, Corn, and World Eater's traits, and interrupt. When an enemy unit is destroyed, deploy this unit from your hand at the same planet as the destroyed unit. So if you attack and you destroy an enemy, or you use a Tzeentch's Firestorm and destroy an enemy, you can pay 2 resources to basically deploy this at that planet. It's not ambush, but it's essentially an identical effect. And Sam, you're the Chaos player. What do you think?
Yeah, it's kind of like a bloodthirsty ambush thing, I guess, like, without actually using either of those 2 words. But it's cool. I like it. It's fine that it doesn't have a command because, it's coming in probably most often mid-battle, although it doesn't have to be triggered during combat. And, it's a 3-2 for 2. Eager Recruit is a 2-1 for 1, so it seems fair enough, but it just strikes me again as a non-Tzeentch card that's better in Zarather than maybe than it is anywhere else, because like, it's easy to blow shit up outside of combat with Zarather than it is any other Chaos Warlord, just because, granted, they all have these, they all have access to the same card pool, but your Warp Storms are hitting for 3, your Nurgle Bombs are hitting for 2, your Firestorm's hitting for 1 more, your Orc Cannon's hitting for 1 more, so it's easier to get rid of stuff. I mean, granted, you're going to get rid of it no matter what, but, like, eventually if you're fighting, stuff's dying, but, for $2 to have a 4-2 is a lot better than a 3-2, so I really like it. It's cool. Again, I'm kind of bummed that it's not more like Khorne specific, I guess, but whatever.
Yeah, and it's of course not nearly as cheap as the played for free Elysian Assault team, but it can definitely pack a bit more of a punch. Because with Zerathur it swings for 4, so like you said, maybe you use a Warp Storm and then it's your combat turn, you're out of units. This guy can attack, or at the end of a combat round, use Tzeentch's Firestorm to blow something up, then you drop this guy into play, you use a combat action to attack, maybe you use the action of Rotten Plague Bearers to kill a unit, and then you have a combat turn to attack with this. Maybe you do something ridiculous like you attack with a unit, you kill an enemy, you trigger this interrupt to put this guy into play, and interrupts always get resolved immediately prior to their triggering event. So like let's say your Zerathur's Flamers attacks, kills an enemy unit, you trigger the interrupt to put this guy into play, and then you use Outflank him and attack immediately with this. Like, there are a ton of different options. Some of them are much more realistic than others, but it definitely looks like a compelling card, and, kind of Infernal Gateway is the stuff of everyone's nightmares, and the more ambush-type effects that Zerathur can have, or any Chaos Warlord can have, this is just looking like it could be very nasty indeed.
Yeah. The next card here is probably my favorite of our 3 spoilers. It is the 1 cost, 1 shield attachment, Staff of Change. War gear, weapon, and Tzeentch traits. It is not loyal. Attached to an army unit. Limit 1 per unit. After you win a command struggle at this planet, deal 2 damage to a target unit at this planet. I like this for a few reasons. Well, okay, it is actually Tzeentch specific, so it makes sense that it's great in Zerathur. I mean, I think it's good on any Chaos deck, but dealing 3 is always better than dealing 2. I do like it also for the fact that it's to a target unit, so it can be a token, it can be a warlord, and the thought of, winning command and then smacking their warlord for 3 is really appealing. It's a little tricky because Chaos isn't the best of the factions for command, but they're by no means the worst either. I'd say they're kind of like a middle-of-the-road command, faction. So I really like this. I mean, you pair this with some of their other damage, like Orc Cannon or, Rotten Plague Bear or, Warp Storm, Nurgle Bomb, whatever. Like, the fact that you can just hit a Warlord for 3 is really strong to me.
Yeah. I guess really the only thing that gives me any pause whatsoever about this card is like, what do you view as the ideal army unit recipient? So Backlash isn't out yet. A lot of Chaos Elites are demons that cannot equip war gear. I would hate to put this on something that could just get, Inquisitorial Fortress or Archon's Terrored, but I guess...
Well, Terror won't work because it's after you win a command struggle. So the only thing the only thing that can screw this up would be like Inquisitorial Fortress or like Sicarius' Chosen or something like that. Sure. Yeah.
But I guess what do you envision just like putting this on unit wise?
Hell, I think you can put it on anything. I mean, it'd be nice to have whatever unit is on sticking around and getting scooped up in your Warlord train to go in command at the next place and do this thing again. But I mean, I'd put it on anything, I guess.
Sure. I guess maybe it's a little bit of a pipe dream, but it just seems fitting that the perfect target in my mind might be the Prodigal Son's Disciple, just because the Staff of Change card art shows a rather fabulously ornamented Thousand Suns Chaos Space Marine kind of making some garish gesture there, and with a little bit of a flair, he's throwing out the staff and eliciting some sort of change, Barack Obama-esque, I believe. Yeah. And then the Prodigal Son's Disciple itself, maybe you win a command struggle, you deal out damage, then when that unit resolves attacks against enemy army units, you further punish them for whatever command icons they brought to bear on units trying to make sure they won a command struggle at that planet. So it seems like promotion is of course going to be a natural ally, and I don't know, so there's certainly a lot of different options. If you can throw it on an eligible elite like that Disciple, that works, and Backlash is...
Is he the only elite that can take war gear at this time for Chaos?
I think is the Possessed. Let me go ahead and
verify. You're right. Possessed can take war gear.
Because they can use the rocket launch.
Right. Right. Yeah. So, okay, you got 2 elite targets and then whatever else. So.
Yeah, but just like you said, it could pretty much be anything, and Chaos is pretty damn decent at deploy stalling for as long as possible, so if you've got ammo depots firing off, and then your last action is going to be throwing out a copy of Staff of Change, maybe there's going to be absolutely nothing that your opponent can do to negate this effect.
Right, and I guess we should note for like future reference here that, if you target an elite with this, they can backlash it and it'll negate the effect, but it won't. The effect doesn't come from the army unit it's attached to. It comes from this card, so can't like kill the unit it's attached to just by backlashing it. But Mitch, why don't you take us here to the killing field, which is appropriately artworked here.
Sure. So it's fantastic artwork. I definitely recommend checking it out. I don't know if the card itself is very fantastic, but a giant pile of smoking corpses. It is Killing Field, so it's a 1-cost support. It's another location, and action. Exhaust this support to have each unit at a target planet lose ranged until the end of the phase.
Yeah. I guess you don't want to put your rocket launches on your possessed if you're playing Killing Field.
Yeah.
I mean, this will be really good against Astra Militarum and Tau.
Yeah.
But other than those two those are the only two factions that are really running a lot of ranged. I mean, maybe there's some Swarmlord player in your meta who is running, the ranged hive mind ability, but
Termagant Spikers.
Yeah, Termagant Spikers. But, it's just a mound of guardsmen corpses, so it makes sense because with like Ratlings and Cadians and preemptive barrage, all that shit's gonna go away. So the dream scenario is right. You're playing against Astra Militarum, and they've got like those cards, and then they're not gonna play their preemptive barrage because you have this thing sitting out. So now it's like wasted. But the one like horrible thing would be like, if they have 3 resources and they play Squig Bombing and then they play Preemptive Barrage and you were just hoping to negate that whole threat and it just all blew up in your face.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a hell of a gamble. It's quite the tech card. I mean, if you include, say, a couple copies of this in your deck, if you're playing Space Marines, it's worthless. Orcs, it's worthless. Chaos. This even affects you. Not that Chaos has a lot of ranged units, but God, Dark Eldar, they don't really run much ranged. So
yeah, I mean, I think we might see more ranged in Morn, right? Because of like the
Bladed Lotus Rifle.
The Bladed Lotus Rifle and the Sybrit Marksman. So like maybe if Morn gets popular, and not that I know if she's necessarily running a lot of those marksmen, but it could be okay. I think it's a meta call card, right? Like, if your meta has ranged in it, then and you like Chaos, then take it. But otherwise, I would be tough pressed to take this card.
Yeah, so I can't really think of much else to say about that one, but just again, thank you so much to Fantasy Flight Games for, I don't know, I guess recognizing the effort that Sam and I put into this podcast and this channel. So it's a great honor, and I hope you, dear listeners, have enjoyed it. But, Sam, we meant to air this interview segment last episode, but I think it was probably a good call that we didn't release a 5.5-hour-long podcast. We recently had the opportunity to sit down with Daniel and Torsten, the 2 co-hosts of the Warhammer Invasion podcast, Winvasion. We wanted to talk about the future of Conquest LCG. So, Warhammer Invasion was canceled, but it went through something like 5 deluxe expansions and maybe 7 cycles in its day. So, Warhammer Fantasy is rather similar to 40K, and we figured this might be a good point of comparison. We actually completed this interview before our Deep Strike mechanic was revealed, so this actual interview took place a little while ago, but even having never played Warhammer Invasion myself, I thought that this would be a great idea. I've listened to every episode of their podcast probably at least a couple times. They had the opportunity to sit down and interview Brad Andrews. If you've ever heard of him, they interviewed Eric Lang. So it was a fantastic show. I think the 2 gentlemen had just great chemistry and charisma between the 2 of them. And, I guess, Sam, why don't you just tell us a little bit about what Winvasion was to you?
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed that podcast. It's kind of what actually got me into listening to podcasts to start with, and I loved Invasion. It was a great game, and I know a lot of our listeners out there are former Invasion players, and maybe there's a few still current Invasion players, but even though like a lot of the things aren't specific to Conquest, I think I was really happy these guys sat down with us. I think it's a good interview. We were just talking about like the evolution and the life cycle of an LCG.
Yes.
And that's probably the most comparable one to Conquest. And we even kind of mentioned some of the mechanics that were similar to Deep Strike, not necessarily just like it, but of course that interview, like you say, took place before we knew about Deep Strike. But it's kind of funny that we'll hear a little bit of talk about these face down cards and how they worked in that game too. So I just want to say thanks again to those two guys for coming on, and I hope you guys enjoy the interview. And real quick before we get to that, I've had a couple of you guys ask me about if we're going to get back to doing the throwdowns and the look backs at the packs. We will get back to those. There's just been so much news coming out and so many releases coming out fast and furious that we've had enough stuff to cover. But we enjoy doing those topics, but those will be good things to do once the release cycle schedules slows down again. So
yeah, once we get a bit of a reprieve from this just like monsoon of war packs, we'll happily take a look back at the pack. But from life unto death, I very much hope you all enjoy a kind of a chronicling and retelling of the entire lifespan of Invasion LCG. So just think about new factions that were released over time, new mechanics, and just everything else, and just think about how we may eventually see Conquest develop similarly. But without further ado, I very much hope you all enjoy hearing from Daniel and Torsten, and we'll see you on the other side of this interview. Sam, today you and I have the great honor of being joined by two guests, both cherished and celebrated in the annals of living card game history. So, my good sirs, please introduce yourselves and let our listeners know where they might recognize you from.
My name is Daniel, also known as Happy Duty on the forums, although I am no longer that active of a participant in the forums, so I'm more of a lurker.
That's everything you have to say about yourself?
Yeah, that's it. Oh, that's it. That's it. Actually, so I might not be as cherished and celebrated as one might think.
Yeah, I was wondering who he was talking about, because it can't be us,
And who are you?
I'm Torsten. I'm Malumo on the forums. I'm from Germany. That's my main defining trait. And together with Daniel, I did the Winvasion podcast.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's an honor to have you guys on. It was part of a package deal. I didn't want Daniel on the show at all, but to get Torsten, he had to tag along. But if our listeners didn't know, Warhammer Invasion had a voice to that community, and that voice was Winvasion. So it's fantastic to have you guys on. And Sam, I think you've got a bit of history with Winvasion.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually the first podcast I ever listened to. So I'm excited to have you guys on. Thanks for being on. Warhammer Invasion was my first LCG, kind of my first love of getting back into gaming as an adult. And always loved listening to you guys. And I told Mitch, you don't play Invasion, go listen to these guys. And he listened to all your episodes. So we're big fans. We're glad you guys are on. And, obviously, Warhammer Invasion doesn't have a whole lot to do with Conquest other than sharing, parent Games Workshop IP company thing. But, a lot of Conquest players picked it up. It recently went on a big holiday sale on FFG's website. And, we thought it might be a little relevant to have you on for that reason as well. So thanks, guys, for coming on.
Yeah, and I think. Oh,
I was going to just say, thanks for the nice words.
yeah, but
No problem.
I think Sam really speaks to the whole heart of the matter. Games Workshop does Warhammer Fantasy. They do Warhammer 40,000. Fantasy Flight Games made a living card game for each one. There was kind of a lot of talk and debate in the community as to whether or not Conquest was meant to replace Invasion or if it was a spiritual successor, but I figured it would be kind of an interesting point of comparison to really talk about the two. Like Sam said, I've never had the opportunity to sit down and play Invasion myself. I knew next to nothing about it before listening to your podcast, but I just loved it. I thought each and every episode was a blast. I've probably listened to all of them at least a couple times. So I was thinking, what better model to maybe compare Conquest to than Invasion? So we'll kind of talk a little bit about the history of Invasion, like the development of the card game, the development of the community, and, hats off to you two for just doing awesome work while Invasion was still around. But to start us off, let's talk about the general premise behind Warhammer Invasion, because I'm sure a lot of our listeners have never had the opportunity to play it before. But just like Conquest, it's a two-player adversarial game, and in Conquest, you build a deck, you choose from what's eventually going to be 9 different primary factions, like the Space Marines, Eldar, Tyranids, or coming very soon the Necrons, and then each of these different factions has unique options for including cards from other armies. Like a Chaos deck might include some Orc cards. So when you build a deck, you choose a Warlord specific to whatever faction you choose, and that unit serves as like a commander for your deck. And each Warlord has different cards associated with it that you have to include in your deck. And during any given game of Conquest, you have to play units to any number of different planets that sit out on the tabletop, and each of your different army units has economy values associated with it. So depending on what is sitting at which planet, you get additional cards, you get additional resources to spend on cards like other units, attachments for those, support cards to back them up, and then big, powerful game-changing events. A spatial component is pretty important in Conquest too, like moving your Warlord and your other units from planet to planet, and you actually win the game by capturing either 3 planets of the same kind or killing the enemy Warlord. But speaking just in general terms, to players that have at least some experience with living card games and LCGs probably specifically, what does deck building look like in Warhammer Invasion, and how does a game kind of play out? And let's hear from you first, Torsten.
Well, there are a lot of similarities across all the LCGs. I mean, you know this, 50 card decks and 3 copies of a card, and that was true for Invasion too. In Invasion, you had your kingdom, which had 3 zones. The kingdom, the quest, and the battlefield zone, and you had some basic hammers in your kingdom and quest zones, and that determined the number of resources you got and the number of cards you draw. And when you play units into these zones, these units have hammers too, and these add to that. So I can increase the number of resources I produce and the number of cards I draw, and the hammers also determine how much damage a unit deals in battle. And you have your battlefield zone, and units in the battlefield zone can attack the opponent. You attack one of his zones, and units in that zone can defend.
Sure.
So that's how it basically works. You win if you burn 2 zones, if you deal damage to the zone. And deck building, I think, changed over time. Like, there were some card types which initially weren't used. Like, there were quests, which were special cards. You could send a unit on a quest. And for a long time, initially, they were bad. No one used them.
Right.
And then when you had like 2 factions who had 1 quest card each, which was in every deck because it was so strong, but still no other quests. And so this changed over time, and they introduced Legends, a special card type, which again, initially, you didn't see in competitive decks. That changed over time too. And I think for a long time, it was quite easy to give like certain deck building quotas, this many units out of your 50 cards and this many supports. But closer to the end, it got really more diverse because you had more viable card types and more viable build, like you could like almost go unitless, things like that. So yeah, it became really interesting.
Well, I guess anything else to add, Daniel, about just the experience of playing an actual game of Invasion?
In terms of main differences with Conquest, I'd say that the experience I've had playing Conquest is very zero-sum. Like if you and I fight over the resources generated by some planet, you get them, I don't. Whereas in Invasion, you could manage your own economy. It was more similar to, I hate to say it, it's more similar to Magic in that way, where I would be managing my system, you'd be managing your system, and then our systems would eventually conflict with one another, versus the more of the knife fight feel of Conquest.
Yeah, a lot less of a dichotomy.
Oh, fancy words. It's this kind of podcast. Okay.
Yeah, we've got our thesauruses open here.
Going to get my dictionary.
Mitch has got the fancy words for days. But so tell us about when did you get into Invasion and why? I mean, what was the initial appeal of the game when you first started, and how did that appeal change over time?
So for me, I started 2010. I just went to my friend's house. No, actually, me and my friend were talking about when we were younger and liked playing Magic and how we both didn't have any money when we were younger. And then he said, hey, check it out. This one weird company, Fantasy Flight, is making these card games with a fixed card pool, so there's no random buy-ins, and you just spend X dollars and then you're done. And as an adult, I had a little more money, so we started playing Invasion at his kitchen table with the core set and the first expansion in the first cycle. So I mean, the card pool was really small, but we still really had fun with that. And I guess the interest grew from there.
What about you, Torsten?
For me it was similar. I started in 2010, which was halfway through the second cycle, I think. Started with the core set and the first deluxe expansion. And me too, I played Magic back in the 90s. And I still had a fondness for this type of game, but Magic wasn't an option. One side is the whole financial aspect, like can you afford it and are you ready to deal with all the ugliness it brings out in people, this whole financial aspect, when people get frustrated because they spend $600 on a deck and it loses. And and I also think Magic has some severe flaws that they never fixed. So I like the idea of a game like Magic, something similar, but with better rules and a healthier approach to costs and card distribution. And I found that in Invasion. I didn't particularly care for the Warhammer setting one way or the other, but I really liked the game. Yeah, and I still think that the basic concepts with the zones and how resource gain and card draw work, all that are still for me the best of any LCG or any card game like that I know. And I think many people, I've seen it online, that people dismiss Invasion for being like Magic, but for me it always was praise because it was like Magic but better.
Right.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest comparisons is the way that Invasion handles actions, and it builds a stack similar to Magic. So I don't know, I'm not familiar enough with Conquest to know, but I think they've gone away from the stack mechanic just because it makes game design harder.
That's correct, right.
Okay.
We've got triggering conditions and cards that play off of an effect, and then it's just kind of each player has a back and forth alternating opportunity to act, as opposed to just stacking up different effects and then resolving them in sequence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. And what kept you guys in it? I mean, obviously you told us why you got into it, but you stuck with it, and you became community leaders. You became the voices of the podcast. What got you kind of to that level from just playing at your buddy's kitchen table?
For me, it was I saw this as an opportunity to sort of get into more competitive gaming, something I'd sort of been interested in, toying with, but my other interest is playing miniatures games, and I sort of avoid competitive gaming in that because it's a very long game, and if you're playing with someone you don't like, you have to sit there playing with them for 2 hours, and it sucks.
Right.
But with cards, if you don't like the person you're playing with, it's over soon. So I decided maybe I can get into this card playing thing. So I sort of got my friends together. We started setting up little tournaments that we could play, and that sort of kept the interest. Having the the regular group of people that you can play with who are also in it to the same level you are, it perpetuates the interest for me.
Huh. What about you, Torsten?
I just really liked the game, and for a long time my local meta was me and a friend, and later another friend, and it was just us, and I was active online simply because the invasion rules were poorly written, and there was a need for clarification, so that's what brought me to the forums. And I don't know, I cared about the game, and I had the time, so I got more active in the forums. And and I don't know, at one point I went to a tournament in a city about 1.5 hours away, and I don't particularly care about the competitive aspect. I don't need to win tournament stuff like that, but it was nice, because the tournament meant hanging out with other people who like the game, and so we decided to give it a go here in our city. And the owner of our friendly local gaming store, he had already mentioned to me that there were many other people playing, but we didn't know them. And so we did this tournament, and we had no idea if like 2 people would show up or more. And we got like 20 people, and it turned out that we had like a lot of small playing groups in the city who from then on got together each month for a tournament. But there was no bigger meta beyond that. You didn't see these people outside of the tournament.
Right.
Yeah, crazy. I sort of had a similar experience where the local gaming store, they'd say, "Oh man, lots of people are buying these core sets. We keep restocking these core sets." And I said to them, "Who are these people?" Because I never see them. So I just sort of pictured in my head somebody buying all the core sets and just putting them in their closet and being happy that they have all the core sets.
Well, something or go on, Sam.
So this is a bit off script here, but when you brought up your tournaments, Torsten, just real quick as an aside, can you explain again the pants or no pants tournament format?
Oh yeah,
because
pants,
I like that name, and I want to have a pants or no pants Conquest tournament.
I need a second to think about it, man. I'm badly prepared. That was when you built the deck for someone else, right? Yeah, exactly. So you can delete all this. So what Daniel calls the pants or no pants tournament is tournament approach where you build a deck. Normally, you build the best deck you can, and you go to the tournament, but you don't play your own deck. Each round, you randomly get assigned with the deck of someone else. You can make it completely random. You can also put some effort into it and give like the highest ranked player the worst ranked deck each round.
Yeah.
And you score points in the tournament normally for how well you do and for how well your deck does. So I have Daniel's deck and play against you, Sam, and I win and I get points and Daniel gets points for his deck. And in the end, you tally it all up and you have an overall winner. And cool. You can also really point at people and say, yeah, you really play well, but you suck at deck building, or the other way around. and it's fun because each round you have to deal with something completely new. We did it like, you have like 30 seconds to look at the deck and try to figure out what the person wants. And the deck building is interesting too, because I think the first time we did it, most people went with like a very basic rush approach, to keep it simple. But later on, people tried something more fancy, in the hopes that the other people would figure it out. And it's fun.
You get new pants every round in case that. I originally thought you got one pair of pants, you had to wear it all day, but you change pants between rounds. So even if you shit your pants completely, it's okay.
It's like taking keys out of a fishbowl. I think we've all done that. But, Torsten, I was just wondering, you mentioned tournaments, you mentioned meta, and, deck building and the skills involved to all of that. Did you notice much of a change over time in regard to what your meta looked like? Like, did it do a lot of growing? And then what was it like once, things started to come to a close with the cancellation of development for Invasion?
Our local meta didn't really change at all. So we had this first tournament, and it was a success. And from then on, we did the tournament every month. And the interesting thing was that like the core group of players who went to every tournament, that was basically me and my friends and some people who lived further away, because all these other play groups here in the city, they were like, yeah, tournaments are nice, and we'll go there if we have the time, but we don't make time for it, So we would have a lot of local people who would show up 2 tournaments in a row and then not 3 tournaments in a row.
Sure.
And that never really changed. We got some new people, and some people stopped playing for whatever reason. We had a lot of university students, and some of them were kicked out of university or something like that and moved away. But it never really changed much, I think.
Well, Daniel, what about the online community? A huge thing about Conquest, I'm in a really isolated area and I don't know a single other person within a couple hours drive that even plays Conquest, but because of the internet, I can make videos, I can go on forums, I can build decks, share, get feedback from all sorts of different people, all kinds of stuff like that. Did Invasion have a big, significant online presence? What did that look like?
Oh, man. Okay, 2 things are happening simultaneously. I think that over time, as more and more people hear about LCGs, every time they release a new one, the community for that new LCG has a potential to be larger than the last one, just because for every LCG, there are people on the outside looking in thinking, I would really like to play this game, but it cost me $600 to buy this card pool, so I'll just wait for the next game to come out. So I think when Invasion first came out, it was one of the first ones. I think it was Game of Thrones, which was insanely popular, Cthulhu, which was not, and then Invasion. So at the beginning, it was sort of just people talking on the Fantasy Flight forums. There were groups that had bigger metas. For example, I think the guy who won the first world championship came from Iowa, I want to say. And he might have, I don't know, he played at a store with people and then we never heard from him again. So maybe he just maybe that group doesn't exist. I don't know what happened to that group, right? So it's more instead of having persistent groups, there are strong individual personalities that would persist.
Sure.
So there would be, screen names you recognize, but not really an online community in the sense that you're describing exists for Conquest. We never really had organized online tournaments and stuff like that. But I would like to think that because of the pioneering efforts of the earlier LCGs, the current LCGs can enjoy this rich interaction online.
I think that, you say that in jest, but I think that's true. So.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
Guess, apart from yourselves, were there other, big significant community content creators? We joke about calling you the voice of the community, but, in a lot of ways that was very true. Were there other podcasts? Were there people that made videos or articles or?
Very little. For me, for a long time, the most important person in the community was Entropy, because he was the rules guy in the forum. Mm-hmm. He was very, very important and someone I learned a lot from. But I have to go back a bit to the earlier question, because I think a problem with Invasion was always that there never was a lot of activity in the FFG forums or anywhere else, because Invasion always suffered from the fact that it had some strong national communities in Europe, like Germany, Poland, France, and many members of these communities preferred to stick to their national forums. And there wasn't, I don't know how many players there were in English-speaking countries, but there weren't a whole lot of active people online. So, there wasn't, you didn't have 200 American users in the FFG forums bringing the activity,
Right.
So, so the online community, the international online community was always small, and you didn't have a clear top place for them. You had the FFG forums, you had Board Game Geek, you had Card Game DB, which contributed to make it even more fractured. So there never was a whole lot of activity, and it was always difficult to get a good grasp on what the community was thinking. Because so many people would voice their opinion in their national forum, and you wouldn't hear of it. Sometimes you would get people showing up. Well, everyone in my country thinks this card sucks, but you didn't know. Well, could be. Maybe,
there was a referendum.
Maybe not, So that was always a problem. And there wasn't a whole lot. I mean, there were some Polish users who made YouTube videos when a new battle pack was released. You know, they got them a little bit early, and they made videos where you could see the cards. And sometimes people posted spoilers if a battle pack was released early in their country, but there wasn't really anything constant. You know, we were the only podcast. There were Polish blogs. I think there might have been a French blog, but yeah, you know, I don't even know what happened in all these countries exactly, because I don't speak the languages and it wasn't on my radar. So yeah,
Right.
But like Daniel said, I think things changed a lot. One thing is that FFG is doing a better job with the more recent LCGs, like the production values are better. But I also think that nowadays, when a new LCG is announced, you know, you get this hype machine going, and you get people making podcasts 2 years before the game is released.
Right.
No?
I know.
Right.
I know you guys had an episode where you were talking about once a new LCG is announced, it's almost a race for someone to dig in their claws and be like the first podcast.
Yeah, and I think if Invasion was released today, it would, for a time at least, do much better, because it would benefit from this hype machine too. You know?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Daniel. No, go ahead.
I was going to say it would also benefit from, you know, the lessons learned. So I think Fantasy Flight, every time they go through a cycle of LCG, they learn a lot of stuff about development of the game, and also like delivering news to the community management. Even though people say there's a lot to be desired at their end, I think they are improving from what I've seen over the past 6 years.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the other thing that speaks to this is just, you know, Invasion came out, 6-7 years ago, and although that's still like recent past, and much of the technology we have today we had then, there's more people plugged in now, and I think that makes an online or global community easier to have.
Yeah. If we had the internet back then, it would have been so different. Daniel and I, we recorded this podcast and we sent it out by postal mail. And it was just so much effort.
Sending him like
it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got all those your back episodes on 8-track. So, but a big reason why we wanted to have you guys on here today, not only because I loved Invasion and your show, but we kind of wanted that voice of the game to provide a point of comparison for Conquest. So, let's talk about the cards. What was the Warhammer Invasion core set? What was it like in regards to quality, fun, balance, and complication? Like, how many factions were there? How many? Like, what were the options? Was it simplistic? Was it wildly unbalanced? Was it really perfect? What was it like? And we can start with you, Torsten.
The core set wasn't good. I mean, obviously it was good enough to draw people like me into the game, but I have very low standards. It was fine, but looking back on it from today's perspective, it wasn't good. It had 4 factions, which was fine, and for example, I think they changed it with Conquest, which had a lot of factions in the core set, because I think with Invasion you always, even years later, you had people complaining that this and that faction wasn't in the game.
Right.
These war
like Bretonians.
Yeah, whatever. No unicorns. No unicorn faction, And but on the other hand, of course, you had more cards for each faction that way. So that was fine, but they weren't balanced well. Like Chaos in the core set was weak, and it was weak for a long time after that. And there was the whole luck of a draw factor because of FFG's publishing model, that you have 3 copies of some cards and just 1 copy of other cards.
Right.
So there was this whole when and if at all I do draw this very powerful card or not, And this is also present in other LCGs because FFG always does it that way. But for example, I thought that the Netrunner core set was more balanced, and I think they are learning there. The core set also had a lot of useless cards, the type of cards you don't use at all once you have some expansions. And I think the good thing was that the cards weren't very complex, so it was accessible. People who have experience with other LCGs and who know the whole action-reaction stuff they have no problem anyway, but even if you take someone who has never played an LCG before, they are going to grasp Invasion quickly, I think. The rulebook was bad. That's also something, if you compare LCG rulebooks, you can see a clear evolution. It's so much better today. Invasion didn't have like a proper timing chart and stuff like that, So I think you could have a lot of casual fun with a core set before you needed expansion. But if you really cared about like competitive play and deck building and stuff like that, it's not good from today's perspective, I think.
Do you have similar feelings, Daniel?
Yeah, I remember when my interaction with the small limited card pool when I started, I never thought this faction sucks or that faction sucks, so I was just getting used to it. But it's upon reflection that you realize that the core set doesn't really offer that much of a gaming experience if you are sort of trying to, be a card player about it, try and make a deck that does well. If you just throw all the dwarves in a pile, that's, that can be fun, but you don't get much of a card game experience out of that if you're trying to be competitive. I find that it's hard to comment on stuff like that because I think that all the LCGs are very weak. It's a very weak experience in the core set to first cycle of expansions time frame. Once you get more cards, then it starts to be more rewarding. But at the beginning, in most LCGs, except maybe Netrunner, people all tend to play very similar looking decks. I don't know if that's true with Conquest, because I never played competitive Conquest. But, in the early days of Invasion, everyone would show up with a similar... There was a tournament in Italy that was this was after a couple cycles, and every single player was playing the same faction.
Yeah, it's not that bad in Conquest, but... and it's getting better now that we're like into the second cycle. We've had one deluxe expansion, but core set and first few packs was definitely similar to what you're describing, where like you kind of knew every deck was the same, so to speak.
Yeah. I think the diversity of different decks, like I mentioned Warlords before, and it's basically you're playing like Space Marines and you pick like between one or two different warlords. So based on who you pick, within a couple cards, maybe 3 copies of that card, people generally know what to expect. But a big part of the reason behind reaching out to you guys is because we're seeing our second cycle now. We've got a second deluxe expansion on the horizon. Invasion definitely has gone through quite a few different cycles. At one point, they broke into a model where they're exclusively seeing deluxe expansions. So I kind of wanted to ask a little bit about how things changed over time from the core set, how new mechanics got introduced, what the community thought about those, what was added, what changed, whether any of these cycles were just fillers or if they were, hits or if it was just complete trash, and then just kind of picking up on some, personal opinions from each of you, whether you particularly liked some new stuff added in. But you mentioned the core set is definitely a deeply flawed product. I think the corruption cycle was the very first cycle of, I think, were they called battle packs?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that was, your first expansion. I guess what was new about that? How did that shake things up? And let's start with Torsten.
Well, it didn't change a whole lot. It didn't shake things up. It added Vezuel as a destruction neutral faction. So you had these 2 big sides, Order and Destruction, which had 6 main factions each. But you also had some neutral cards, which could either be completely neutral, for every deck, or could be like destruction only neutral. Right. And the Skaven were destruction. The Skaven were destruction only neutral faction, which was introduced in the corruption cycle. And like with all the other LCGs, the first cycle was basically an extension of a core set. So. I don't know, if someone was getting into the game today, I would tell them that the corruption cycle would be the last cycle to get.
Sure.
Yeah. It helped one side more, with destruction side more than the other side. So without fixing that problem of chaos being weak. Yeah, I don't know, it had some very powerful cards which stayed powerful almost until the end of the game. But yeah, it wasn't very, very exciting. It was an extension of the core set with all that entails.
Well, Daniel, what was balance like? I mean, if the Skaven were the new hotness and it was only destruction that had access to those, was really anyone playing a good aligned deck, or was it all evil all day every day?
I think in the early days it was actually all good all day, every day.
Well, then I will never play this game.
No.
The dwarves.
No,
The
no,
dwarves
no,
were
no,
pretty
no.
strong, man.
That was later. That was the enemy cycle. I think
okay.
at
See,
that time
it's
corruption
hard for me to
cycle.
tell.
It was all orc wash, orc with Skaven and wash. And
Oh,
I
alright.
remember people complaining about that because it made the game too simple because you couldn't
Oh, I see.
play control.
So to go with the, I don't know if they still do this. Like, this is sort of tough to remembering this far in the past. So whenever they'd release a cycle, there'd sort of be this kind of philosophical write-up by the designer, what they were trying to achieve in the cycle.
Sure.
So ostensibly during the corruption cycle, they were trying to make a bigger use of like corruption as a mechanic.
Yeah.
Whether or not that was achieved is up to us to discuss, I suppose. But
Just so our listeners know, corruption as a mechanic is kind of like exhausting in Conquest. Like you tap the unit. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but it sounds much cooler, corruption.
it does. It does.
It does.
But
Can you-
people still say tap this guy.
No, but I mean, you have a workout and afterwards you say, I'm corrupted. It's so much better when exhausted.
That's how I always feel after a long day of work.
Yes.
I guess in terms of how balance kind of evolved throughout expansions is, I don't know, Torsten, you can disagree with me as you always do, but there were people who, whatever the newest, most powerful card tended to be, people picked it up because it was new and powerful, but it also, like, beyond just the hype effect of being a new card, it actually seemed like every time they designed a new toy, it was so much more powerful than the old toys that there was a sort of a group shift towards that faction. So I guess your comment about all evil all the time, I misremembered. Torsten says it was it was like that. It was Orc Rush. So that kind of pattern persisted.
Was the power creep in Conquest like very noticeable, and was it like one-sided or one faction at a time?
Power creep. I want to go back to what Daniel just said about the new toys, because something that I think was a problem with Invasion is that Invasion had a lot of developers over the years.
Yeah.
So they changed developers a lot.
Right.
And so what you would see is that there was a new developer and he had ideas. He would bring something to the game which was good, and they all had great ideas. But then he would stop working on the game, someone else would become the developer who had different ideas. So you often would see like things not properly continued from one cycle to the next, because there was the new guy with his new ideas. And I always thought it would be possible to do both, to continue the old stuff and add something new, but that's not what happened. And I also think that a lot of the new elements, when they were added, like new card types and new mechanics, they usually weren't all that good initially. Like at some point there was the Legends Deluxe expansion, which brought the new card type Legends, but you didn't see those cards in competitive decks. There were some other cards from that expansion which were powerful, which made it into competitive decks, but this new card type, and this was often what happened in the course of Invasion, that they added something new, but initially they were too careful with it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't all that strong, and it wasn't until, I don't know, a couple of cycles later that they would revisit it, that it would become viable.
We've kind of seen that in Conquest, the Tyranids, which are kind of the Skaven equivalent. When that deluxe expansion came out, our deluxe expansions are not part of the rotation system, so they're always going to be a part of the card pool, and the power tier was fine, like they're totally viable, but they're not quite the, tier 1 tournament winning warlords or decks. So it's just kind of, it's interesting, it drives up community hype, but they don't exactly see a ton of play. But on the topic of deluxe expansions, once you'd moved beyond corruption, we saw Assault on Ulthuan was the very first deluxe expansion. And Daniel, what exactly was the premise behind the first big box?
It added the Dark Elves and the High Elves, which was kind of funny because I think in the core set there were something like 2 Dark Elf cards and 2 High Elf cards just floating around. And you had to wait until you picked up this deluxe expansion to get their capitals. The capital is the equivalent of the Warlord.
Like they weren't even usable cards?
They were usable because so each card in Invasion has a loyalty. So if you were playing an order-aligned race, if you were playing the Empire or the Dwarves, you could play a High Elf card by paying the loyalty cost as well as the cards cost. So you could play with these cards.
Oh, okay.
But it didn't really make sense to.
Sure. Well, I guess what was unique about the Dark Elves and High Elves?
Well, you'd have to ask the elf aficionado that you've got on the line here.
So, Sam, what were the differences?
No, I was a dwarf player. You have to ask Torsten. I was dwarf all the way.
Oh. I think Assault on Ulthuan was, of course, important because it increased the number of playable factions from 4 to 6. So you kind of had to get it and have to get it if you want to play Invasion. And I think it was. I think the cards for the Dark Elves were okay, but the High Elves for a long time were just as bad as Chaos. They were very weak. Because all these ideas they had for the High Elves initially, they didn't work out. Like the High Elves were good at healing, and that didn't work out because in Invasion you very rarely had injured units. You killed units, you didn't injure them.
Yeah.
And so healing effects were kind of pointless, and they had these anti-corruption effects, but corruption wasn't really a thing. And even if it had been, it would have been a thing for like 1 or 2 factions. So. Yeah, the High Elves, I don't know, you would kind of have to get the expansion for the High Elf capital, but not for the High Elf cards, But yeah, it was okay. I don't know. It's kind of like the corruption cycle and extension. We promised you 6 factions, so here are the remaining 2 factions and enough cards to build decks for them.
Right.
But it wasn't great.
Hopefully, we're giving the impression that they needed a lot more cards to sort of set up the base of the game, which I think they're doing better with newer LCGs.
Was the core set a product that came? I know you said some cards were 3 copies, some cards were 2 copies, but something that the LCGs have definitely moved more towards is having like a shit ton of cards, but just 1 copy of each, so that you feel less burned by buying 3 core sets. Was there just like a low total number of cards available when it first came out?
I'm not sure what you're asking, and I would have to look it up. I think the core set had like 240 cards, something like that. But
okay,
I'm not sure how many different cards. And
if I recall correctly, there were like more one-offs in the Invasion core set than like say Conquest or Game of Thrones, something like that.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know, but I don't know the other core sets as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Not a problem.
Yeah.
But after Assault on Ulthuan, we saw the enemy cycle was, I guess, the second cycle of battle packs. And Daniel, what was the gimmick behind that set of expansions?
Oh, Jesus. I'm going to defer.
Hello?
Yeah, I can't remember.
It sounded like you just pushed your chair over and left. Like, stupid questions.
No, I honestly can't remember the gimmick of the enemy cycle. I think it was a misnomer. I don't think enemy referred to I think it referred to they used to have these little stories that they would include in the battle packs. And I think the enemy cycle name referred to like this, the High Elves versus Dark Elves story that they included in one of the boxes. So the boxes were supposed to be playing off that conflict.
Yeah.
In terms of mechanics, I can't remember.
I don't think. I mean, all the later cycles and expansion added like something new. I don't think the enemy cycle added anything new, like a new mechanic or so. It had the new publishing model that you had 3 copies of every card, which
Okay.
Of course.
corruption cycle and then assault didn't have. I don't know, and then I think the important thing was that the enemy cycle really helped the Empire and Dwarf factions, and that was kind of the beginning of a long time of Empire dominance, or what was perceived as Empire dominance. Yeah, it was okay.
Well, I suppose the second big box was called March of the Damned, and that's a kind of suggestive title. But what was that introducing, Torsten?
That expansion introduced the Lizardmen and Undead neutral factions.
Okay.
So it had a lot of neutral cards, which was nice because I don't know if most people I know played every faction, but I also know some groups where they like divided it. You get the Awe cards, I get the Chaos cards, and neutral cards. Everyone can use them, and and that really made some new deck types possible. Not exactly competitive deck types, but we had like these Lizardmen. They had a mechanic where if a Lizardman unit was wounded but not killed, it could damage an opposing unit, and so you could pair that with the High Elves who had indirect damage effect, and damage your own units to shoot damage. March of the Damned was fine, I think.
Well,
Yeah.
do you have any memories of that? A little bit better, Daniel.
Yes, after I emerged from the haze of the enemy cycle, I clearly remember March of the Dead. No, the undead were highly used around here. A lot of splashing undead in the destruction faction decks.
Yeah, but it was a bit like cherry picking all the time. Like there was like this one undead unit which was very powerful, and you could put it in every destruction deck, so you put it in. But you didn't make like a whole undead themed deck or something like that.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, it
What
was
about,
an undead slider. You'd slide the undead slider left and right.
What about the More Sleeve cycle? That was the next one. What did that do for the game?
The more
I want to say Sorcerer of Tzeentch.
the More Sleep cycle introduced the Wood Elves, which was the final neutral faction. Where you really weren't exciting in the beginning, because that was exactly the thing which I talked about earlier. But the Wood Elves, they had this special mechanic only they had, but the cards that had it were too expensive, and the mechanic was too expensive. So in the end, no one used it. And but the More Sleep cycle and the Legends expansion, which was released in the middle of a More Sleep cycle, they really procced Chaos forward. And Chaos had for a long time been the weakest faction together with the High Elves, and that when you suddenly had Chaos as basically the strongest faction. So it really shifted the balance.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess the next... Oh, go ahead, Daniel.
I was going to say, so I remember Sorcerer of Tzeentch, and I remember like a lot more, and the Wood Elves I totally forgot, because they weren't a faction at the beginning. They were just a weird neutral card that had the trait Wood Elf. So,
Right.
They were a neutral faction, just like Lizardmen and Undead and Skaven.
In hindsight, they're a faction because now I think they have their capital, but at the time there were not many Wood Elves, man.
Yeah, because they released them like 2 cards per pack, and it didn't
exactly.
take like
Exactly.
Lizardmen and Undead. Here's a whole box of them,
Exactly. Wasn't there a focus on developments? Is that what they were getting off with the Sorcerer of Tzeentch? So they were trying to get the development mechanic to be more used, which was take a card out of your hand, play it face down into one of your zones, and that zone gets a hit point. So the hit point by itself wasn't a huge benefit, but now they had more cards playing off that mechanic.
Yeah, the development mechanic had been there since the beginning of the game, and it had always been nice, because if you had a useless card in hand, you could just use it as a development, which added hit points to your zone. But it wasn't strong, there were like no offensive uses for that. And the More Sleep cycle had a lot of cards that interacted with developments, like a unit which would get stronger if you had a certain number of developments in its zone, or stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right. I remember really liking the development, like whole mechanic. I just, I liked that the dwarves could power up off it, or that one Wood Elf card, the Wild Riders. They were great if you had a lot of developments. So.
And I think the Invasion got better with every expansion, and I think this time More Sleep cycle and Legends expansion, that was when it really got good.
Yeah, talk a little bit about like the Legends, because you've hinted at that, like how it introduced this whole new, card type and mechanic. Like, kind of what did that do or try to do when it came out, and kind of how did it miss the mark?
Well, you always had units, and you had hero units, which were like unique ones. You could have only one of them. And then came legends, which were like even bigger than the heroes, which in some cases really didn't work out fluff-wise, while this guy was a hero and this guy was a legend. But a legend was a card which you would put on your capital board, so it wasn't actually in any of your zones. And it would contribute power to each of your zones, and it could be attacked through each of your zones. So I could attack either your capital, one of your zones, or the legend, and they usually had powerful effects. But so this was fun, but initially, again, we were like a bit too careful with them. They were like too expensive. It's the same effect you have with units, and which I'm sure you have in Conquest too. Well, it's a great unit, but I don't have 20 resources to play it. And kind of like that. So a lot of these legends were kind of like win more cards. Like if I get to the point where I can play that legend and keep it alive, I would have won anyway, even if I didn't use the legend.
Right.
And they had cards, of course, like a unit which would get stronger if you also had a legend and stuff like that. But these again weren't used because the legends weren't used in competitive play, in casual play, of course. But there were many other interesting cards unrelated to that theme.
What about you, Daniel? Anything to add to the Legends expansion release?
Yeah, the one legend that was sort of feasible for semi-competitive play was Kairos. The rest of them were, like Torsten said, huge liabilities. You pay like all your resources to put this card on the board and hope he doesn't die, because his effect only really comes into play next turn. And Invasion was getting faster and faster. So by this point, if you waste a turn, you might lose.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, just because we've talked about so many different expansions so far, and there's been a lot of new factions coming out with the Lizardmen and the Skaven and everything else. What kind of players were you two like? What factions were you drawn toward, and what kind of play styles did you have? And let's start with you, Daniel.
I think like from always choosing the fighter in RPGs and stuff like that, I sort of gravitated towards orcs, not for any real reason. And in the beginning, they were truly unsophisticated, so it fit my personality. But I started, by the end of it, I was not really attracted to one faction or another. There were some factions I didn't really feel were for me, particularly High Elves I didn't feel were for me, but I would still play High Elves every now and then. But the initial allegiance to orcs really was just for no reason, and it went away.
Well, and Torsten?
Also, I like evil shit.
Yeah, I made it a point to play every faction. I had the time, and I wanted to experience the game fully, and I had the cash, so I didn't have to share. I could buy a whole battle pack for myself,
Nice.
So yeah, I made it a point to play every faction, and they all had something, because I think that was something Invasion was good at, that the factions all had something unique. But if I had to pick one, it would be the High Elves as my favorite.
Well, I guess
that's why we get along so well.
Well, moving beyond the Legends expansion and the Morsleeb cycle, what about the Capital cycle? So that one came out next, and Torsten, what was the general premise behind, I guess, the third to last cycle of battle packs?
Well, I think the special thing with the Capital cycle was that they tried a new publishing model again. Because before and after you would get a battle pack and it had cards for every faction, like 1 to 3 cards for every faction and some neutrals. And with the Capital cycle, they made it different, like 6 battle packs for 6 factions. So I think of the 20 cards, I think 15 would be for one faction. So there was the Chaos pack and the Empire pack. The tricky thing was of course that in some cases the best card of the cycle for a faction wasn't in that pack. So it wasn't like you could say, well, I only play orcs, I only get the orc pack. You still had to get the other pack, And it was an experiment, but it was of course tricky balance-wise, because one faction would have to wait 6 months for its pack.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I'm Capital Cycle. I'm trying to remember.
Didn't they introduce wasn't that like in every pack the faction got like their big bad support? It was like
Yeah.
Right.
But those didn't really matter. They had like this expensive support for each faction, like the Capital Center, but it mainly confused people, because some people thought that this was a special card, like a legend. Do I have to put this on my capital board or something? But it just was a trait that didn't matter at all.
Right.
And but they had some cool cards in there. That's what I mean. It got better with every cycle, and more creative and more diverse. And yeah, we definitely had some cool ideas in there.
Anything to add to that, Daniel?
Yeah, they tried to make those capital centers, as you were talking about, but destruction of supports by that time had become efficient enough that putting down a 4-cost or a 5-cost support never really made sense.
Yeah, people in Conquest bitch about 3-cost supports, so I can only imagine that playing one of those 4 or 5-cost supports would really hurt. What about the Blood Quest cycle? That was next. What was in that?
Blood Quest was cool, because Blood Quest was kind of like what I mentioned earlier, that they revisited some older stuff. So like quests became more important. You got better quests, and you got cards which benefited from quests. And I think Blood Quest was also a push for legends. Like that they made new, stronger legends and more viable legends.
I think they made more legends, but I think the really good 3-costers in the next cycle.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Wasn't the Blood Quest cycle like where they had
these artifacts?
The artifacts, but wasn't that there like a dwarf quest where you could actually remove a burn token?
Yeah.
Like I just remember that being like powerful. I don't know if it really got off the ground. But that would be like in Conquest, that'd be like, making your bloody warlord hail again or something. It was like, removing something that had become basically dead and bringing it back to life, so to speak.
Yeah, but that wasn't like competitive,
Yeah, I know. It was fun.
Actually, they included something. They really changed the tempo, I think, with those 1-cost towers. The 1-cost, 1-power supports. I think those came in Blood Quest for each race, and they really increased tempo.
What did those do again?
So when you were starting a game of Invasion, you started with 3 resources. And often one of the problems you faced was you wanted to build up loyalty on your board. So every time you played a race-specific card, it generally gave you 1 loyalty for that race. So if you wanted to play 2 power on your first turn, sometimes you were playing a neutral card, which wouldn't give you loyalty. In this cycle, they introduced 1-cost supports that were faction-specific, which never existed before. So what was good about that is you could play one of those for 1 resource, and now you would have 2 loyalty. So you could play a 2-cost, 2 loyalty unit, and then all of a sudden you have 3 loyalty for your next turn. So loyalty stopped mattering at about 3. At that point, you're playing your bigger units on turn 2 now. So that speeds up the flow of the game.
Right.
I'm thinking that's actually the Eternal War cycle. Yeah.
Oh fuck! What?
Yeah. Eternal War cycle had these racial villages, as we called them.
Yes, that's right. The racial villages.
Yeah. No. Blood Quest had quests and new legends, more stronger legends, and like altogether more interesting and powerful cards.
Well, in that case, Blood Quest is garbage, and we should be talking about Eternal War.
Well, guys, let's move right into it. Aside from those racial villages, which sounds like a horrible death camp, what else was there in the Eternal War cycle besides those?
Eternal War it added 2 new keywords, ambush and raider, and ambush was particularly interesting because you could play developments like we explained, and if it was a unit with an ambush keyword, you could pay and turn it face up when you were attacked. So that was interesting, like a bit more tactical gameplay. It also added even more new legends which were really cheap. and good, but it changed the win condition, so your opponent has 3 zones and normally you have to burn 2 to win, and if you had played one of these legends, even if it wasn't in play anymore, you had to burn 3 zones to win the game. So that was kind of fun, and really also brought new deck types with balance issues again. Yeah.
Right.
But,
what about you, Daniel? Anything other than the racial villages that you recall from the Blood Quest cycle? What was your opinion of those cheaper but win condition changing warlords? Or I'm sorry, not warlords, legends.
I thought they were fun. The game sort of ended very close to there, so we're now left with a state where they're sort of super powerful, and 2 of the most powerful decks that exist right now make use of them. So that's kind of maybe leaves something to be desired. I think, Torsten, what cycle was there were tons of restricted cards. I want to say this one because I'm looking at it right now and it has Muster for War, which I remember it being like this was a card that just basically gave you cards and money for free. Cards like this that were picking up the pace of the game so much all started getting restricted, and I think this cycle might have been full of future restricted cards.
Yeah, this was one of the problems that there were always cards which came out and you thought like, what were we thinking? This is also in part, I think, due to the changing developers, and there were a lot of corrections, and sometimes it got really a bit weird. Like so there was this card Warpstone Excavation which was in the core set, and it basically gives you a resource for free, and it's the type of card where like completely new players think, oh, this sucks, because it has a small drawback,
Right.
but it's actually one of the most powerful cards in the game. And so for a long time you had these stable cards. You had these 9 cards which would go into every deck. And when came the restricted list, and it wasn't possible anymore, but so everyone went with 3 copies of that one card in every deck. And later they changed it so that you could actually, it was still restricted. So if you chose that card, you couldn't pick any other of a restricted list, and you could have only 1 copy, which was effectively banning the card.
Yeah, we had Brad on, and he talked about like the lessons learned with Warpstone Excavation. And I remember that card very well.
Yeah.
How quick was FFG to respond when a card became a big problem? Like in Conquest, there was a card called Klavex Warleader, and it was basically, well, it is basically always a 2-for-1. Like the instant you play it, you can basically kill an enemy unit, and then it can probably also kill an enemy unit. So it's just, this incredible card, and the community was crying out that it was broken and that it was ruining the game, and it was really overpowering one faction. And then after a long kind of product release delay, we find out that there's some card in the works that's going to basically counter this thing. But, were there cards that just kind of broke the game for a while?
Kinda near the end. Like End Times was a card which was hard to deal with. But I think some people would say that there always were cards like that, but it was always hard to judge, because what I mentioned earlier about the community being fractured, and it was often really hard to tell what the community was really thinking. But for example, there was a time when the Italian community considered a certain Empire deck to be completely overpowered. And you would get like a few, like a handful of Italian users in the English forum complaining about that and stating it as fact, that everyone in Italy thinks that way, even Berlusconi, everyone thinks this card is bad, and I think, FFG did not go, oh, okay, if you think that we will ban this card immediately or something like that, So often FFG reacted slowly. And I think it's kind of similar with other LCGs, that it can seem like they take their time. But I think mostly that's correct, that you say, well, let's see if the community figures out a way to deal with that.
Yeah.
Because you could really see there was this groupthink going on, Oh, Empire or this Empire deck is so strong right now. If I go to the tournament, there will be many people playing that deck, So do I try to beat that deck or do I play that deck myself? And many people played that deck themselves. So most people at the tournament played that deck. And in the end, the tournament was won by that deck. And many people with that deck ranked high. So, it was all true. That deck is too powerful, Yeah, I don't know. It's, I think, I don't know, some things obviously should have been caught in playtesting, should have never been released, like this Master for War card Daniel mentioned. And I think on the whole, it was okay how FFG handled it. They really didn't like banning cards. They only ever banned one card. And later they did this thing that I described, where it was essentially banning, but not really banning. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes they were a bit too slow in taking like cards off the restricted list again, realizing that by now the meta had changed so much that the card wasn't a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was always hard for me to really get an idea like what was broken, because I mean with every game the people who are online are the loud minority anyway, because so many people play at home at the kitchen table and never go online and never talk about it. And tournaments, yeah, it was always tricky.
Well, what was that one banned card? Like, what was so powerful that it just had to be eradicated?
That was a quest actually. That was an early quest, which was which allowed the Empire to quickly accumulate tokens and move cards around. So the Empire always was good at moving cards around, so it could move a unit like from one zone to another. And it could also do it to the opponent. Like there was this one hero unit, when he attacked, he could move one unit from the defending zone to another. That was good. And this quest, you could accumulate tokens and spend these tokens to move enemy cards, but any card, not just unit. So I could move all your support cards from your kingdom and quest zone to your battlefield where they were useless. I could move all your units to one zone, leaving the other zones undefended. And the quest was strong by itself, and Empire was good at getting tokens on it fast.
Right.
And it was really, I think it was correct to ban it because it wasn't fun, because you could really completely remove the ability to do anything.
Right. Well, let's get back to our last two expansions here. We had two more big boxes come out, Cataclysm, which introduced a multiplayer variant. So talk about that and did it catch on? Did it not catch on? How was it compared to head-to-head? Because I think, in Conquest, it's a great, head-to-head game, but there have been people that have made up 3 or 4 player variants, and some people have been asking, for 3 or 4 player variants. So what was Cataclysm like, guys?
I think Cataclysm's focus on multiplayer was very intriguing. I think multiplayer was very fun, but I think it should have come out way earlier. Because by the time it came out, we had years and years of 1 versus 1 play, and the multiplayer, if you took a 1 versus 1 deck and played it in multiplayer, you could, but people weren't really sure how to make the most of their multiplayer experience. So instead of pursuing multiplayer, people often just switched back to 1 versus 1.
So you had to deck build differently for Cataclysm than you would a regular game?
I'd say that there were enough cards in the Cataclysm box that encouraged you to include them in your multiplayer deck that had no use in 1 versus 1. So,
right. What about you, Torsten?
It had a very. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say that it had a very team up feel to it. So if you were playing a 3-person game, for example, and 2 people teamed up on 1 person, that person was often screwed. So they had a good thing going with this multiplayer idea. I just don't think it was... it could have been executed maybe earlier, and which would have then dictated how cards came out in the future, which would have made it more fun. Instead, it came out at the very end, so it's this nice little flavor on top. But I didn't see a lot of multiplayer where I live.
Yeah, Yeah, I really liked the multiplayer rules, and I liked that you basically needed different decks. You know, that you had some cards which were almost useless in single player but very strong in multiplayer, and vice versa. So you could definitely play multiplayer with your single player deck, but you would lose if the other people had proper multiplayer decks. I really liked it. It wasn't perfect, but you know, that's the thing. Like, whatever you put out, you know, someone is going to prefer it slightly different. But the problem was really that it came too late. That was one of the problems, that a lot of people like had it set in their head that Invasion was a one-on-one game, or they were happy with, you know, these basic multiplayer variants, you know, attack on the left, defend to the right, you know, stuff like that. So it came too late. They really should have made it earlier. And the other problem was that, so I was always a bit unhappy with Invasion, because Invasion on the whole was always a bit too fast and direct for me. You know, I like more the control type of playing, and so for example, I would always have preferred it if the zones had more hit points. You know, if it would take longer to burn a zone. And I think one problem with Cataclysm was, with the multiplayer rules, is that they added this political element, you know, that there was this aspect of talking, you know, I can convince you that you really should attack Daniel, because otherwise he's going to pull away.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I think, were drawn to Invasion because they liked the basically simple and straightforward gameplay. You know, I pull out units, I attack you, bam. And a lot of people like orcs and, you know, and like rush decks in Invasion. And for them, this was really something completely different. And I know people who don't like that at all, you know?
Yeah. It's like playing Risk with your family, where by the end of it, you all just want to kill each other.
Yeah.
And that's why I don't have a family anymore.
Yeah.
All-time Risk champion.
That's right.
What about Hidden Kingdoms? That was our last expansion for the game. It introduced, you know, the Lizardmen and the Undead and the Wood Elves and the Skaven as full-fledged factions in their own right. You know, taking out the news that came, like, you know, a few days later that it was the last product released.
No, same day.
Same day. Don't remind me. I think in my brain I had moved it to a few days later. But you know, taking that out of it, like, how did you guys like the addition of these four new well, they weren't new, but four newly fully fledged factions?
Why don't you go ahead, Torsten?
I liked it. It wasn't like you know, super important for me, but you know, you had these Warhammer fans who really wanted to have an undead capital, so they could have a proper undead deck and stuff like that. I mean, you could do it before. You could basically build a 50-card undead deck and use a chaos capital. But now, you know, they had real capitals with special abilities, and you had more cards which applied to their faction in some way, and it was good. The problem was that, yeah, on the same day they cancelled the game. So, I mean, there were already like junior factions, because you had much fewer undead cards than Chaos or Dark Elves or whatever. So you didn't have as many options for deck building. You know, there weren't many viable Lizardman or undead decks or stuff like that. And it's, of course, going to remain that way, because we're not making any new cards. You know? So, but in itself, by itself, it was good. You know, but maybe like the multiplayer rules, it should have come earlier.
Yeah. What about you, Daniel? Any thoughts on that?
Same thing. I thought it was super cool. I really liked the introduction of their capitals. Their capital boards were just regular playing cards, which is fine, I guess. But I thought it would have added so much more in terms of decision making to have 10 factions. That really appealed to me. Now, I guess Conquest has sort of the same number, so from the very beginning, I think that's a good idea to start with a huge number of factions and just expand the card pool from there. But yeah, like Torsten said, it kind of never got the time on the table maybe it deserved, because people kind of stopped playing once they said, that's it for cards.
Right. Yeah, it was a shame that they had to drop that announcement the same day. They could have waited like a month.
It was the same announcement. Like if you looked at the release announcement and scrolled down, it'll say near the bottom like this completes the game or something like that.
Gosh.
Yeah.
I never even played it, and I feel depressed just listening to all of this.
Yeah. Well, the end of the development of Invasion, it came very close to the announcement of Conquest. So, were there hints or signs that the end was near? I mean, they obviously, they went to the big box deluxe release model only, and of course at that time Cthulhu had already done that, and Cthulhu lived much longer. Once it had reached that distribution cycle model. So, how did the community receive that announcement of Conquest when it came? Was there anger, or how do you guys feel about it then and now? And we can start with Daniel.
It's tough for me to say. We did a poll on the website asking if people thought that Conquest was going to replace Invasion. Some people felt that way. I thought that for a while Invasion had felt like it was sort of the testing ground for them. Like Torsten mentioned, new developers coming on all the time, every cycle. So it I sort of got the impression that it was on the way out. I could never have called that it would be canceled the same day Hidden Kingdoms was released, but the switch to big box releases and the rotating developers, you kind of got a picture that it was sort of the low priority card game. And then when they had massive success with other card games, you could sort of tell it was coming. But with respect to Conquest, I think it wouldn't be reasonable to feel any sort of anger or animosity towards the other Games Workshop branded LCG.
Yeah. What about you, Torsten?
I think people for a long time were worried that Invasion might get cancelled simply because there was this impression it isn't doing so well. Because there wasn't so much going on in terms of tournaments in the US and, World Championship participants and an online activity. And you had all these newer LCGs which had all this hype, and all this excitement. I think for a long time people thought, well, as long as Cthulhu is still there, we are safe because Cthulhu is doing even worse, And I believe the decision to cancel Invasion was made somewhat short-term, and I think it surprised a lot of people at FFG. But I don't know for sure. I never found out what really happened there. I don't know if... I can certainly imagine it, but I don't know if someone decided that it would be bad to have two Warhammer LCGs, that they might compete with each other. Someone once said to me that what is it called? Warhammer Disc Wars. That might actually be a greater threat for Invasion. Because it's also a Warhammer Fantasy casual game. I don't know. I don't know who exactly made the decision and how it was made, and if it was made by, let's say, a games person or a money person. I don't know.
Right.
It certainly came as a shock, and I think, in terms of science, like Daniel said, like this treatment by FFG, that you kind of got the sense, okay, there's a new developer, and he gets to do Invasion, and if he does well, he gets to move on to another game, and of course the impression that the Warhammer license isn't as powerful as Star Wars, for example.
Sure.
So... I think bottom line it came as a surprise because everyone thought like, well, Cthulhu goes first and then we'll have to worry.
Right.
Well, I guess just the natural progression of things is I'm curious, have either of you tried Conquest? And I suppose because you're not actually game developers, you can just kind of disclose your honest thoughts. But what did you think about the game, if either of you have played it? Like, I know, Daniel, you've got some experience with, I think, Tabletop 40K, but have you given Conquest a try?
I think you could look in your rule book. You might find Torsten's name in there.
Oh, as a playtester?
Yeah, I was a playtester for the core set.
Oh.
So, yes, cool. I have played it. Before it was cool.
Well, I guess, what did you think?
But it's hard for me to say, because I remember versions of the game which were different from the version you know. I don't think Conquest is bad. I think Conquest is a fine game, but for me it's like, Star Wars LCG is a good game, Netrunner is a good game, Conquest is a good game, but none of them clicked with me the way Invasion did.
Right.
And I don't particularly care about the setting. I don't like the Warhammer 40k setting much due to the humans. I don't like the fascists in space, and I don't like looking at a card and have a guy with a mustache like a porn actor from the 70s holding a gun and sitting on a tank. I don't like that. So if I were playing Conquest, that would
What's
be,
not to love about that?
If I were playing Conquest, that would be like, yeah, I'm going to play Eldar and you can keep the other stuff.
Oh gosh, now I feel like I have to shave my mustache.
Not surprising that you would choose the High Elves of space.
Well, I just don't like the human factions.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing, and the whole Empire. Yeah, but anyway, but if it had really clicked with me, as a game mechanics wise, I would play it, But it didn't. So I don't know. I don't dislike it. I don't think it's a bad game. I don't have any bad feelings about it. I don't blame Conquest for the cancellation of Invasion, but it's just not my game.
Sure. Well, certainly can't fault you for that. But what about you, Daniel? What's your experience with Conquest been?
So I collected Cthulhu and Invasion, so I have two very large card collections in my house.
Sure.
And when Conquest came out, actually quite a few of the Invasion people switched over and decided they were going to play Conquest now. And so I played a couple hands with them, and I thought it was fine. I could see that there was more for me to learn about how to get into the pacing and stuff, but I kind of just, the way I describe it is I sort of hit peak cards after Invasion was canceled, and then Cthulhu, you could get the same picture that Cthulhu was on its way out too, so I thought maybe I don't want to pick up a new core set, and also coupled with the fact that I feel like the games they produce mature and get good for, let's call it 2 cycles out of the core set. So I thought I don't want to buy a new game and have to wait 2 cycles. Now this is me saying this. I don't know if Conquest was good right out of the box. I'm sure it was a better experience than Invasion right out of the box. But in my past experience, given my past experience, I decided to just wait and play with my friends' cards, and then some things changed for me, so I've had less time to go out and hit the card store as much as I used to.
Well, yeah.
Just a bunch of things happening at the same time.
Right.
I wish I could give you like a sexier answer. It'd be like, oh, it was just, yeah, man, I couldn't take it, all the pain I was feeling because of Invasion. Look at those Conquest players so happy, and I was like, you're going to lose what you love too.
Yeah. Well, hopefully not for a while.
At one point, I just balked 10 Conquest core sets and I burned them. I burned them to the ground.
You went out in the parking lot in front of the FLGS and just held them burning.
Yeah. And I held up my sign with the hashtag Justice for the Orcs. Yeah.
Well, if you can send us a picture of that, we'd love to promote it on Mitch's channel. So
of course.
Well, as part of the settlement with FFG, I'm not allowed to release any photo materials.
This conspiracy over the canceling of Invasion actually goes deeper, because they canceled Warhammer Fantasy Battles, the tabletop game.
Right.
And they've re-released it as something they call Age of Sigmar, which is more of a skirmish type of game, which sort of in spirit is more like 40k than it is like Fantasy Battles. So there's that angle too, that perhaps Fantasy Flight knew what was coming, because they released a card called the End Times, which is what Games Workshop called the final sort of story arc to Warhammer Fantasy Battle.
Yeah, there's been some talk of that in the Conquest community, because there's been some whispering that, the end times of 40k could be coming, and Games Workshop's going to do something radical, so people have remembered that. So I guess we're safe until we get a card called whatever Games Workshop is calling their, big cataclysm of 40k tabletop. But have you guys? I mean, are you still? Here we are, a few years after the cancellation of Invasion. Are you guys still involved in it at all? Obviously, the podcast stayed around for a little longer, but ultimately it did come to a close.
Have you moved on completely, or you still involved at all? What are you guys doing nowadays? And we can start with Torsten. Sorry.
I still have all my cards. I'm never going to sell them. But I'm not playing much anymore. We did the podcast for a little while longer. And together with some other folks, I did this fan expansion for Everwar, where we made new cards. But the thing was really that the end of Invasion kind of coincided for me with some changes in the personal lives of myself and some of my friends. Children and new jobs and all that shit. There wasn't.
Tell me about it.
There wasn't as much time for playing anymore. So that's really also with Conquest or anything. I thought okay, nothing new with Invasion. Am I going to pick up another game? And I have by now found a game I really like, but I don't have the time, and my playing partners don't have the time. So I don't know. Even if I were still publishing Invasion today, I would hardly play it, I'm afraid. So I've stayed involved with the podcast for a bit, and then the fan expansion, and I still check the forums infrequently, stuff like that. But it's kind of like for my group, for my core group, it's maybe kind of had to drop out because of life, because reasons.
Oh man, that's real.
Yeah, always gets in the way, doesn't it? Well, and I mean, Daniel, you have a similar experience, I assume, from where you've chimed in here.
So we've moved a couple times in the past couple months, and I have a kid now, so he takes up a lot of time. When I do have time to play games, it's sort of not on the regularly scheduled type way. It's more like, hey, it's 9 p.m. on a Wednesday, I have some free time. So it's hard for me to commit to any sort of game that involves another person in real life.
Right.
I guess something I was kind of curious about, you mentioned, Torsten, fan-made expansion. Can you tell us a little bit about the Forever War project?
That was something which started basically right after the cancellation. So I had been an Invasion playtester for a long time at that point, and so I was obviously deeply involved with the game on many levels, and so I had my own card ideas, which I at some point had sent to FFG, and they had made some cards based on my ideas, which was really great and really netted me zero money, which was really sad. Yeah. And the game was cancelled, and back then, I was an emotional kid, and I was in my, we have to keep it alive phase, Sure. And so I got some folks together, and we set about making a fan expansion, and properly, with real original art, and we pretty quickly released a whole pack, like a battle pack of print and play cards, so you have to print it out and you have to put it into the, what's the word?
Sleeves.
Sleeve, exactly. And when it took us, I think, a year to release the second pack. And it's also something, we see the download numbers and we get some feedback, but that's also something where you see, I think, the fragmentation of a community, that we don't get a whole lot of feedback, and so I don't really have a proper idea how many people actually use these cards, how well it is received, because like I said, the community was fragmented before, and it was hard to get a good idea of what was going on. And now, of course, it got much smaller after the cancellation. But this was for me and the people I worked with. It was really like a heartfelt project. And of course, kind of cool when you can finally make your own cards, because you're so much better at it than...
Yeah, they were way better than...
Well, I mean, just having had the opportunity to take a look, the artwork is fantastic, and I'm sure if I understood the mechanics behind Invasion cards, it really just looks like a mountain of effort went into it. So just absolutely fantastic job. That site is still online, and I'll be sure to include links in the video description in case listeners want to go check this stuff out.
Yeah, if it matters at all, Torsten, I downloaded them and I used them, and they were like well balanced and they were cool, and the artwork was like, oh, I mean, the artwork, whoever you got to do the art for that was just, it was awesome. They were just as good as the real cards, if not better in some cases. So, good on you.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, we've asked you guys a ton of questions. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. This was a couple months in the making between Germany's time zone and Sam's time zone, so I hugely appreciate your time. But, Sam, we've got a bit of a ritual, for better or worse, around these parts, so why don't you finish it out here?
Sure, guys. We just have a little deal here I do whenever we have a guest on the podcast. It's called Put It on the Table. So I'm going to ask you 5 quick questions, and I want short, succinct answers. So are you guys ready to put it on the table?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. We'll start with Daniel, and then we'll go with Torsten. So I'll just ask the question. If you had to play one faction right now for one game against one another in Invasion, what would it be?
Chaos.
Do I go now, or does he do all 5 of them? It wasn't properly explained. Does David?
I'm sorry.
Daniel.
Yeah, you can. Daniel can answer, and then you can answer.
Okay. High elves.
Fuck.
I know. What's your least favorite faction to face in Invasion?
Dark elves.
Orcs.
What's your favorite deck type? Like a Gathering the Winds combo-esque deck, some sort of development and ambush deck, like a Orc even odd deck?
Damn. I'd say that I like card decks that make use of and exploit the development mechanic and do direct damage to other people. There's no cool name for that.
I really like decks that put a twist on something. Like Rush was usually orcs, many small units Rush, and I had a high elf single unit Rush deck, and I liked that, where you blew up one unit to deal a lot of damage. So take something and try to find a new way and put some twist on it. Yeah.
I thought one of you would surely say a night theme deck, but I guess not.
Yeah, right. The ultimate tier 2 deck type.
Yeah.
Ultimate. What's your favorite game other than Invasion?
Ooh. Do you mean tabletop
Anything.
games?
It's a wide open question.
Right now I'm getting really into Bloodborne. I've been playing the shit out of that game. And by playing the shit out of it, I mean in my 4 free hours a week, I try to play Bloodborne, maybe one of those hours.
I like Eric Lang's games. I really liked Chaos in the Old World, and I'm really like Blood Rage right now. I really, really like Ashes, Rise of a Phoenixborn, which would be for me, or could probably be an Invasion replacement if I had more time and if my friends had more time. I really like social deduction games like the Resistance or Avalon. And yeah.
Hey, can I interrupt the Put It on a Table session to ask a question about Ashes, Rise of the Phoenixborn?
Sure.
Well, Torsten, do you know what the expansion schedule is on that? Is it kind of keeping pace with LCGs, or is it...
No, like 3 or 4 times a year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. I've heard that's a good game, but no worries.
I'll put it back on the table.
I will say it makes me sad that Plaid Hat Games is kind of discontinuing Summoner Wars in favor of Ashes.
Are they?
It's an old passion of mine. It just seems like it hasn't gotten any attention in probably 2 or 3 years now.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's throw it back on the table here for one last question.
All right, let me unzip.
All right, favorite band?
Oh, man. I've recently been getting back into classic rock, so I guess my favorite band right now is probably Pink Floyd.
I don't have a favorite band.
It's not Rammstein?
Rammstein.
No.
Well, Taylor Swift isn't a band, so if you just want to answer that artist's name, you can do that too.
We've had many discussions about Katy Perry.
Did we?
Okay.
Did we? I don't remember that.
I don't think Torsten knew she was a musician. He just knew she was a person that looked good, maybe. Well, thanks, guys. And Mitch has got a little bonus question he always likes to throw in.
Oh, fuck.
I do. So I don't understand music. I do understand Katy Perry, but I don't understand most music. So I just wanted to ask the both of you. Let's start with Torsten, because I know anime is huge in Germany. What's your favorite cartoon or anime?
Ooh.
You've walked into a trap because Torsten is actually very, very knowledgeable on anime.
I really was into that for a while. I even wrote about that for a while. But that was long ago, and I was more into manga than into anime. So
A true
I
connoisseur.
yeah, so I have to think. So obviously the Miyazaki movies like Spirited Away and Mononoke, really like those. Yeah.
Put it on the table, man.
Excellent. I guess
I said put it on the table, man.
Yeah, it's I didn't expect this. I have to think. If I had to pick one, the Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya,
Okay.
probably.
Well, Daniel, how about yourself?
Ooh, I'd say that the one anime that I watched that evoked the most emotion out of me would have been Graveyard of the Fireflies.
An excellent choice. So, thank you very much, gentlemen. You've both performed admirably in regard to my question. Color me very surprised indeed, but that was fantastic. So,
You were fishing for My Little Pony. We know what you're up to.
Well, I've heard your podcast before, so I'm surprised Torsten didn't say Neon Genesis Evangelion. I believe Asuka.
Well, I started with Evangelion like so many other people. I still think it's good, the original series, but yeah,
Sure.
it didn't come to mind. So
Well, if there's anything you guys ever want to watch to cheer you up when you're thinking about the sad cancellation of Invasion, it's Neon Genesis Evangelion. But, thank you guys so much for coming on. I can scarcely express how much I appreciate your taking the time out of your enormously busy schedules to humor Sam and I with an interview and to educate the Conquest players a little bit about, the roots this game has in other LCGs in Invasion. I guess, do you want to plug your website? Like, if somebody wants to listen to Winvasion, where might they go?
the website is winvasion.net. And you said you listened to all the episodes. I'm pretty sure some of them were awful. So I would like to point to a certain episode now, but I didn't do my research. I don't know when we were good.
Well, I
You're
would
always
say,
good.
But we had
You're always good.
interviews too with Lucas Litzinger, Brad Andrews, and Eric Lang. So I thought they
Jeremy
were
Zwirn.
good. Jeremy Zwirn also. So yeah, I think if you're interested, want to check something out. If you don't know Invasion the game, I think these interview episodes had a lot of general information.
definitely. So hopefully someday we'll have the opportunity to speak to Eric Lang ourselves. And if we can ever speak to Damon Stone, we'll be sure to get you guys back on. But, thank you so much for your time. And Sam, unless there's anything else you'd like to say, I think we'll call it here.
I just want to say thanks to Torsten and Daniel for coming on. I was a big fan of your guys. And thanks for all you did, and thanks for coming on today.
No problem.
Thanks for having us, and I expect the letter with the cassette tape of this episode next week.
Sure.
Ooh, I can do 8-track, but I can't do cassette.
I'll transcribe it by hand, and I'll have a pigeon, take it to you. So, but thank you guys so much, and have an excellent evening or day, whatever it happens to be in your time zone.
Thanks, Mitch.
Thank you.
Well, Sam, it was an absolute honor to finally have the opportunity to sit down with Daniel and Torsten after what felt like, well, I guess it was literally months of trying to find time to finally conduct the damn thing. But I absolutely...
And then months more to actually get the thing out on the airwaves here because
Right,
of all
right.
the news articles and packs we've had.
Yeah, so I mean, from like, I guess the birth of this idea to the final execution, it was probably something like 4 months, but it was
Right.
definitely well worth it in my eyes. I definitely learned a lot about Invasion LCG. It's kind of a shame I never really paid much attention to that game while it was in its glory days, but it sounded like a hell of a time. And, Sam, Invasion is near and dear to your heart, so I guess, what did you think of the entire interview?
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed the interview. I liked the insight and how, the life cycle of a game and how, we can expect, not like the specific things we can expect in Conquest, but just kind of a model of how FFG, introduces mechanics and how they kind of view like their cycles as individual, entities, and then, things change from cycle to cycle. But the main thing I got was that I just missed listening to those guys because even, it's been a year or two since they did their podcast, and I just miss listening to them because they do have great chemistry, and you could tell just even when we sat down with them. So.
Yeah, definitely. So I cannot recommend enough giving Winvasion a listen at the very least. You should listen to their episodes in which they interview Brad Andrews and Eric Lang, two of the, people that sat down and created Conquest LCG. But I think really the biggest difference between Invasion and Conquest in regard to what potentially makes it a really strong game is just the fact that we've had such a consistent design team. It seemed like that was kind of a struggle for Invasion, just going through myriad different developers like Lucas Litzinger and then Brad Andrews and a couple others like Damon Stone here and there. So just seems like it was a great game. Thank you again to the guys from Winvasion. But Sam, I suppose we may as well wrap up another giant episode here. So anything you'd like to say before I close us out?
No, just I want to say thanks to listeners, I guess. That's all I got. So thanks, guys, for sticking with us for another one, and we'll be back in a couple weeks. Hopefully we will have Wrath of the Crusaders by then.
Yeah, it's certainly looking like it. So I'll just say to listeners, thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of the Tyrantcast. I'll just mention if you are interested in signing up for the Spring 2016 League of Sam Mann's Black Crusade, check out blackcrusadeleague.blogspot.com. If you play games of Conquest, please report your results at Paul Steiner's database, 40kconquest.blogspot.com. And of course, if you want to interact with Sam and I, the comments section is a great place to do it. But please throw a like to the Facebook page, throw a follow to the Twitter account, just because I'm trying to transform the Hive Tyrant into a veritable pillar of the Conquest LCG community. If you yourself are a content creator, if you make videos, if you make a podcast, if you write articles, get in touch and I would be honored to promote your stuff. Growing this community is what Sam and I are all about. In the very near future, we're going to take the plunge and dramatically increase the audio quality of Warmaster Sam Mann, so look forward to that. And if at any point you feel like giving back to the Hive Tyrant, I would be just delighted and deeply appreciative were you to make as little as a $1 donation to the Patreon page, just because all of it helps recover file hosting, operating expenses, and it helps purchase some of the audio and video recording and broadcasting equipment that Sam and I use to keep delivering this show and everything else the Hive Tyrant does on a daily to bi-weekly basis. So once again, thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and as always, be sure to check back in again soon for much more Conquest LCG content to come, and thanks for listening.